Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to Invest Ottawa and Bayview Yards. My name is Sonia Shorey, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President Strategy, Marketing, and Communications here, lead economic development agency for knowledge-based industries in Canada's capital. Welcome to Empower, creating a safer, more equitable, and inclusive future for all women. I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to see how our International Women's Week programming has grown over the years. Here we are on a healthier, more equitable, and inclusive future path for all women for every walk of life. We could not be having a more important discussion. Before we begin our important program today, I'm going to be stepping in for our diversity and inclusion strategist, Rita Alma, to deliver our land acknowledgement. Rita, we wish you a very speedy recovery, and we wish you were with us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather virtually is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory and come together as a national community. Further, I want to respect and affirm the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. The Algonquin people are in an ongoing negotiation and conversations with our governments of Canada and Ontario to establish a treaty that provides certainty about the ownership, use, and management of the land, the natural resources for the Algonquins, and all those in the settlement area. This will help to remove barriers to economic growth created by the existing uncertainties and contribute to a more stable political and economic environment with greater potential for regional economic development, jobs, and growth. We encourage all Ottawa residents to look into this further, and to all those who are joining us today to become informed about the happenings of the land claims and other issues that are pertinent to self-determination and the freedom of Indigenous people local to you. Further, we recognize the contribution of the Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and all Indigenous peoples have and continue to make, both in shaping and strengthening our community and our country as a whole. Our hybrid event today is hosted in partnership with our valued partner RBC and Inkblot Therapy, and it's made possible by our stellar event platform partner Hoppin. We're delighted to have many visionary leaders and experts from across our region and throughout Canada attending today, both here in our foundry and online. And I am honored to be joined by my good friend Jenna Suds, who will become our MC, my co-MC for today. Well known for her incredible work with our tech community here in Ottawa, Jenna has served as the founding director of Canada North Business Association, City Councillor of Ottawa, and now Member of Parliament for Canada Carleton, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth. She's been recognized internationally for her work in economic development, and she's a committed champion to our community and a wonderful friend to us here at Invest Ottawa. Jenna, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sonia. My pleasure to be here, and so great to be in person and to see all of you that have joined us, and of course, all of you online as well. I'm especially happy to be joining you here today as co-MC with Sonia to speak about the extraordinary contributions that we know that women make, as well as the road ahead, the journey that we have ahead of us as we seek to use our voices in boardrooms, in facilities like this, and in society at large. I know a lot of work, of course, has been done to ensure that we are increasing women's participation by not only setting up programs and deconstructing barriers, but making sure that we're creating pathways for lasting success, training and mentorship opportunities, and showing young girls that they can do it. The conversations that I know we're going to have today are incredibly important. As a woman in politics myself and a mother to 3 girls, I can think of nothing more important than creating an equal future for Canadian women. I want the Canada that my daughters grow up in to be a place where they can see themselves as leaders of the future. And I think the only way that we can achieve our collective goals is to take action as a community. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today and to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Jenna. We're so grateful to know there are decision makers such as you, so many others who are joining us today taking action on these critical issues. We are very grateful for the champions and allies who join us today, our community, and so many members of our ecosystem, including boards of director members, mentors, advisors, sponsors, and partners, and critical investors, including the Government of Canada, specifically FedDev Ontario, the Province of Ontario, and our city. And of course, our team, the employees of Invest Ottawa, who are driving action on these goals every single day. Together here at Invest Ottawa, we have established a bold vision to be the best city in the world for women founders and business owners to launch and scale successful, sustainable global companies, and to help establish the first $100 million woman-owned and led company here in the capital. We cannot realize that vision until we have created a safer, more equitable, and inclusive future for all. Together as an integrated community, we believe that we can lead the country and the world on this front, and our team is committed to making significant progress on this imperative with you. Today represents another important step in our journey. We know we have a long way to go.
Amazing, Sonia. And I'm proud to be part of a government that is tackling some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. Including working on our first 10-year national action plan to end gender-based violence. Also, the completion of Canada's first LGBTQ2 action plan, and the advancement of gender equality and inclusion across absolutely everything that we do as a government. We know that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women, particularly women from racialized or marginalized communities. And this is an issue that impacts all of us, and it impacts our economy, our society, and our communities. Today, we hope that we will inspire, equip, and empower women across Canada by bringing together courageous women leaders, champions, and allies who are driving change and taking action to address some key issues in our country. As a society, we need to provide resources, ideas, and solutions to help address these issues. And that work begins with conversations like the ones that we'll be having here today.
Now, a few housekeeping guidelines. We thank everyone for placing your phone on silent. We aim to help create the best possible experience for everyone here today. For those who are with us in the Foundry, your health and safety does remain our top priority. We have maintained social distancing here in our conference facility with prepackaged snacks and hand sanitizer that will be available to you throughout the day. Although masks are not required, we do encourage them, and we thank you for respecting the different comfort levels and the health and safety steps that are being undertaken by those around you. Our restrooms are just to the left and to the right down the stairs. We have free guest Wi-Fi for those who are with us, and we look forward to receiving questions both here in the Foundry as well as online. Please use the Hop and Chat box. Our team is monitoring that, and they will pass those questions along to us on the stage. We invite you to share this incredible experience on social media using the hashtags WeMeanBusiness and IWW 2022. We are recording today's event, and we will share it broadly so that as many people as possible have the opportunity to benefit. We will be taking snapshots as well. Thank you to Peter for being with us, and we encourage you to share this broadly with us to really maximize that impact and the benefit to others.
So welcome to Empower. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our first discussion today. It will be a fireside chat with the Honourable Marcy Ian, Minister for Women, Gender Equality and Youth, as well as the MP for Toronto Centre. Minister Ian is a devoted Toronto community leader and former journalist who's dedicated her life to providing a voice for those who need it most. She's a passionate advocate for vulnerable communities across our country and around the world. Many of you may know her best through her work that she did in her award-winning career in journalism and television that spanned 3 decades. This conversation will be led by Shav Hashbel McIntosh, Director of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Wealthsimple, and Director at the Board for Invest Ottawa. Siobhan is a community builder, educator, speaker, and diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. She believes in the power of galvanizing community, fostering culture, and ensuring that people feel valued, included, and heard. So with that, I will turn it over to our first panelists.
Okay, I'm excited to be here with
I'm
you.
so excited to be
Hey,
here.
everybody tuning in. I have a lot of questions. The first,
Ask them all.
okay, perfect. I was just like, I'll make sure that everybody has some time to ask questions as well. And I will start off by saying that there is nobody more excited for this conversation than my mother, who, hope you're watching, Mom. She has always wanted me to get into radio and television arts, and she met you and had the pleasure of doing that. So she is excited and listening.
Shout out to your mom.
Thank you, F. McIntosh. I wanted to start off the conversation more getting into your journey into politics. I think something that's really important for youth is to be able to have someone to look up to, seeing themselves in leadership, seeing themselves in spaces that they don't traditionally see themselves occupying. But I also think it's important for all women to be able to have that. And you are definitely an example of that for me. So thank you for that personally. And I just wanted to maybe start and ground the conversation into what that journey was like for you, why you made that decision, and what you didn't have as you were coming up that you want to make sure that, you know, the youth and people coming up behind you have. It's a lot of questions.
It's a lot of questions, but Shav, they're good ones. Your mom was onto something. So it was about 25 years that I was doing journalism, and I didn't see myself a lot. In most of the positions that I had, I was the first Black woman to co-host a morning show in this country. I was a panelist on a talk show with my friends, but I was the sole Black panelist. And so it's always been important for me to be what I didn't have. And that means mentorship. So there are, I would say, thousands of young people, now young journalists, that came through the newsrooms that I was in, came through the studios that I was in, and that I had the honor and privilege of mentoring, or was able to refer them to friends in the industry that they could shadow, that they could connect with. And that's been extremely important, because you're so right. If we don't see ourselves, we don't fit in. We question where we fit into this country, local city, and schools. I've been thinking a lot about that. I have a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old. And I think about that all the time as I see the books that they bring home, what they're reading, the kind of curriculum. And by and large, they don't see themselves. And it starts at a very young age. And when that is implanted at a very young age, it grows. And it leads to all sorts of trauma. And it leads to, you know, kids getting into trouble. It leads to them being taken by the streets. I represent Toronto Centre, and I see it all the time. So that is something that has always been front and center for me. So to be Minister of Youth as well is an incredible honor, but there's lots of work to be done. The question around politics.
Yes.
If you had asked me, and Jenna knows this, a couple of years ago, or said to me, hey, Marcy, this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to run in a by-election, and then you're going to run in a general election, and you're going to win both. And then a couple months later, you're going to be appointed, and you're going to be the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth. I would have said, absolutely not. You are wrong. I will likely be producing a documentary somewhere, or hosting something somewhere, or doing an investigative report or a special, but absolutely not. It is not anything that I ever wanted. But the change came, Shav, when George Floyd was killed. And I had to explain that to my kids. I had to explain that to, my then 8.5-year-old, what this meant, that this man who looked like his grandpa or an uncle died this way. And I had been thinking about how I had been using my microphone for some time, whether I was using it well. I had the opportunity to talk a lot about being a woman in Canada, but being a Black woman in Canada and a mom when I was doing the social. And it's funny because I would get emails all the time from people who said, Marcy, we thought we knew you. We watched you do the morning news and all these things, but we're really just starting to get to know you now because it was opinion-based and I could share my life experiences. And so I was starting to think about, from the position that I was in, whether I was serving the way I needed to serve. And as I looked at leadership, whether it was in the company that I was a part of for many years and the systems in place there, I didn't see myself. I had had several executive producers and directors throughout my time. Most had been women, none had been Black women or people of color. I started to ask questions. How can I be you? What does it take to do what you're doing? And understanding that diversity doesn't necessarily mean inclusivity. And that's really important. And then you look at government, you look at leadership in that way, and you think, oh boy, it's even more dire when you look at it. And so for me, it was a phone call. I got a phone call, and it was, would you ever consider running for us? I'm a pretty decisive person, and I couldn't say no right away. I couldn't say absolutely not right away, because at the same time I was thinking about service and how I could do things differently, and maybe this was the kind of service I was looking for. And so I had a long talk, Shav, with my family and with my friends, and it really came down to Blaze. It came down to my 17-year-old, then 15-year-old, who said, Mama, if not you, who? Yes. You need to do this because the country needs you to do this. And your lived experiences matter. You being at that kind of table matters, because you can bring forward discussions that nobody else can. And here's the situation. As a cabinet minister, we're in 2022, and it was Jean Augustine, the Honorable Jean Augustine, the incredible Jean Augustine, before me, that was the first Black female cabinet minister. And almost 20 years later, there's me, 20 years later, and I'm number 2. And that, frankly, is not good enough. It's not good enough. But that's the story, how all of this came to be. But Shav, the decision to do this took a lot of courage. It wasn't an easy one. It wasn't that I wasn't afraid, because I was. It wasn't that, I thought, am I going to regret this? Am I doing the right thing? I'm tossing the lives of my children up in the air. All of those things. But I really thought it's Blaze's words that continue to echo, if not you, who? And if not now, when?
Yes, that's so powerful. And maybe you can make that next phone call to somebody else and call them in.
Absolutely.
I love that. And I also want to talk, because there is, as a woman of color, as a Black woman, as people from underrepresented communities, that innate pressure that comes with being one of the first to occupy a space. There's the pressure of having to feel like you have to be flawless and excellent. There's the pressure of honoring the ancestors who made so many sacrifices to get us here. And then also the pressure of the future generations that we're trying to reduce that friction for. So in all of that, how do you make sure that you have the space to center what you want and what you need and your desires in the midst of all of that?
Because you make such a good point. There isn't a lot of space when you're first. And I know this because for me, it was about worrying about who's next and making sure that there would be a space. And that's where that pressure comes in. Where for me, as a journalist and even as a minister now, as a journalist, it was the research. I have to make sure that I'm well researched. I have to make sure that I know my interview subjects in and out. I have to make sure that I don't make a mistake. And it wasn't necessarily that others were putting that pressure on me. It's that I was putting on myself. And what I can tell you from experience is that that pressure can lead to issues, personal issues. So here's an example. I told you about George Floyd and all that was going on there. I had helped to produce a special for CTV on race in Canada at the time, along with a couple of my colleagues at Bell. We were really proud of that special. We spoke our truth in that special. But having to and wanting to, but having to lead in that regard, the questions that come up, people asking, well, what do we need to do? How can we help? How can we be an ally? And I have to tell you, I started to resent that question. I started to resent the question of allyship. What can we do? Because as citizens of this country and of the world, these are innate things. If you see that harm is being done and you truly want to help, then you just do. The onus isn't on the people who've been victimized to come up with a plan of action. And that's really important. And I say this because that's a different kind of pressure. And I remember after doing that special, taping a show one day, we were just about to tape, and it was the height of the pandemic. So we were taping from home. So I was at home and had this set up with a computer and microphone and this whole thing. And we weren't even discussing anything about, George Floyd or race or being black and like any of these things. We were discussing something remotely different. And I started to cry. And I couldn't stop. And I didn't go to air that day. And I didn't go to air that day. And I didn't go to air for up to 2 weeks after that. I had to take a leave because I realized that there was trauma there. And in trying to be there for everyone else, I hadn't been there for myself. And that trauma had built up and I hadn't addressed it because I had to be the representative in the room. I had to be the one that was making sure that I was a voice for those who didn't have one. And in doing so, I didn't take care of me. And that's a lesson that I've learned. And it's a lesson that I have vowed to myself to make sure that I never get to that place again. That I make sure that I do just take space for myself.
So important. And I'm actually in the middle of a break myself where I'm doing work at Well Simple, but was involved in a lot of extracurriculars, whether that's board involvement or just, volunteering with community groups. And in January, those telltale signs your body's kind of telling you, you feel it, you push through because that's what you have to do. The pressures from all the other places. Right. And in February, I was just like, no, I have to stop. And so I am stopping until the beginning of May because of that reason where I was just like, I'm not serving myself, so I can't be in service of others.
I'm so glad you did that because as Jenna was saying before, that this pandemic has disproportionately impacted women. We've seen that in youth. But when you look at marginalized, racialized, Indigenous women, then those numbers are exponentially higher. And when you look at who has been on the front lines and is on the front lines, you again see racialized, marginalized, Indigenous people, women. And the other part of this is there is already trauma there. There is latent trauma. I've been reading all sorts of different articles and studies about the impact of racism. and how it's a health issue. Literally, racism can kill you. And so if the people working on the front lines and women have been disproportionately impacted and are carrying all sorts of trauma already, then we've got some work to do.
Some work to do.
We've got some work to do.
And I want to get a little bit into the work that you're doing. 10-year plan, big
The
scope.
National Action Plan.
National
Yeah,
Action
yeah.
Plan. I want to get a little bit into that. Like, what does it cover? And then just a little bit digging into how we can solve these problems at the systemic level
Yeah.
in like a sustainable way.
Yeah. So the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence is something that is at the top of my mandate and something that I have been working on in concert with my provincial and territorial counterparts because it is going to be an all of, I say, government's approach. This is not one government that's going to get this done. And on top of that, it's stakeholders, like the people here, that are also, working at a grassroots level, see what needs to be done, understand what needs to be done, and are part of that conversation too. And so what it will mean at the end of the day is that any woman or anyone that identifies as a woman is protected, has the supports in place no matter where they live across this vast and beautiful country of ours. But that takes work. And what I realized in meeting with my provincial and territorial counterparts is that this is not a one size fits all solution. What the province of Saskatchewan needs is not necessarily what the province of Ontario needs. And different provinces prioritize in different ways. For example, human trafficking. That is something that happens across this country, but in Ontario, it is top of list. So in talking to my counterpart in Ontario, human trafficking would be something that, Ontario would want to have a huge, huge place in any kind of action plan. But if you're looking at Saskatchewan or you're looking, at Nunavut, then you're looking at intimate partner violence a lot of the time. You're looking at Indigenous issues a lot of the time. I had a really interesting conversation and learned so much with Rebecca Kudlu, who is a chief in Nunavut, and she's also a social worker. And she said something to me. We were talking about GBV and how to move forward. And she said, we really have to focus, Marcy, on prevention and not just action after the fact. And that means men and boys. And so for her, that is her focus right now, where she is having conversations with men and boys in her community and working through the layers. We talked about trauma, working through the layers of why intimate partner violence is perpetuated. What's happened in the lives of these people that they are then harming others, and most often the ones that are meant to be closest to them, and breaking that down. And as she said to me so succinctly, an eagle cannot fly with one wing. If we're going to really impactfully look at and stop gender-based violence, it has to include both genders, all genders. And so that is something that is very, very important. There is the youth aspect of this too. And young people have had it really hard. The last couple of years have been so hard on our young people. We've asked so much of them, whether it is learning at home and then going back to school and then learning at home again. And then for those young people that frankly don't have homes. How many stories did we see? So many of them of young people just trying to get homework done in a local fast food joint because they didn't have internet. Because the assumption was, well, of course kids can learn at home because people have all the things they need at home. And that's not true. And speaking of home, We told everybody to stay there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily safe for everybody. So tackling that as well. We immediately, at the height, at the beginning of the pandemic, supported with $100 million for shelter-based organizations. And what that meant was more than 1,300 organizations were able to help 1.3 million people get shelter, and we've continued to support so they can continue to get the shelter they need and the protective services that they need, because that is so important. You know, not everybody could shelter in place in their condo or in their home or at their cottage. So many of us, you know, for so many of us, that was not the deal.
Yep.
That was not reality.
And it's so important to make sure that you're taking that into account. And I love everything you say. I think I feel like the team at Well Simple hears me say this all the time. You have to fundamentally understand the problem you're trying to solve for. And that's by being in council and speaking to community and building with versus building for.
Exactly.
You know, I've seen so many solutions be implemented in communities that just didn't work out because it was coming from like a perspective of people who are privileged, who are not, you know, exposed to that reality. And so it's really refreshing to hear that that's how you've approached and will continue to approach this work.
But Shab, I'm approaching it that way because a lot of that is my lived
Yes.
experience, right? And that's what I mean about real inclusivity and having someone like me at the table to break down or help to break down the system that is very much in place. Because the system, I'm even thinking of, you know, the political system was not built for women. And it most definitely wasn't built for women of color.
Yep.
It just wasn't.
Yep.
It was built for men and it was built for white men. And that has changed. I mean, with the election of Jenna, me, Yara Sachs, Yara and I were 99 and 100 in the House of Commons. We now have 103 women. And it's important. It's important that the lived realities of all of those members are front and center, because that's how policy reflects all of society.
Absolutely. It's so important. I just like picking up the gems you're dropping and
Yes.
trying to take all the mental notes. I will be watching this back to take some of those notes. I don't know if there's any questions that have come in. I have a lot of other questions, but other questions? Anybody have any questions? We're good to go. Perfect. If you do, just put it in that chat and hop in. When sometimes I'll speak for myself instead of inferring this on you. Sometimes the gravity of the work that needs to get done feels overwhelming for me because, like you said, it's about dismantling these systems of oppression that have existed for centuries. And we're in 2022 and we've seen some progress, but some days I'm just like,
Where's the progress?
where's the progress, right? Some of those days are harder to kind of get out of bed than others. And so on those days, on those challenging days, on those days where it feels overwhelming, whether that's because of like your own lived experiences and how that kind of like impacts the work you do, or whether it's the work, how do you kind of like move through and navigate those hard and challenging days?
I remember the wins. So, for example, conversion therapy. 2021 was a really good year. We got a bill passed, and it is now law that is illegal to practice conversion therapy in Canada. And we got all party consent on that, which is not easy to get. But my friend and colleague, Justice Minister David Lametti, was set on making change. And together, along with our colleagues, we were able to do that. But that change, that's a really good example of change being led by those at the forefront. So here's the example there. The bill that was passed and made into law wasn't the first time that we had tried to pass a bill on conversion therapy. The second bill that did pass was stronger than the first. And the reason that it was stronger, Shab, is because at committee, survivors of conversion therapy told their stories. Several of them were from my writing. Several of them, people that I know and that I serve, told their stories of how this has impacted their lives, the trauma, how things have never been the same, how this hurt them, how, there's a trail of broken relationships in their lives because of this, and the therapy and all the things. And hearing all the brave people that came forward to tell their stories moved not only the justice minister, but everybody working with him. And it made the bill stronger because now it's illegal to do it anywhere and there isn't an age attached to it. And that's an amazing thing. But that's an example of listening to people, empowering people, giving them the courage to tell their stories in a safe space, and showing them that when they do, change can happen. And so when I get tired, and I do, when I get frustrated, and I do, I remember the wins, and that's a big one. And I also remember the advice of someone far smarter than me, who has been in this um, realm for far longer than I have, who said, "You're going to want to do everything,
Yes.
everything," and I do, and I want
Yes.
it all done quickly, and everything. And I come from a business where we had a deadline. A producer would say, "Marcy, we need a story to be 2 minutes, and we need it for 6 o'clock tonight. Can you get that done?" And I got it done.
Yeah.
Even at 1:59, 1:50, I got it done. Here in this world, it takes
organization connected us. That's where the magic happens. And I agree with you. At 15, it's almost too late.
It's too late.
So number one, thank you very much again for what you said. And number two, is there a Coles Notes version of some of the priorities? Because we have a lot of them. We have Albert here from Junior Achievement. What can we focus on or read?
Thank you
That's
so
a
much.
lot of questions. I'm
It's a lot of
sorry,
questions.
but,
No. It's a lot of questions. And what I want to do is talk further with you and connect you with James, who's working on the youth part of our portfolio, along with me, because there's so many different things, George, that I can point to. So what we'll do afterwards, I'll make
Okay.
sure that you have the info to get in touch with me, and we'll go through some of the ways that you can help. But I want to say to you, thank you for wanting to help, because that is a huge thing. And thank you for saying, hey, I'm putting my hand up. How do we make this better? And your comment about kids being at home and not having enough to eat, that's a huge one, because you're right. A lot of the breakfast programs that are housed in schools. And if kids aren't at school, then what happens, right? Then what happens? Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question before I keep going from there? No? That's all good. Okay, so this is I'm asking for a friend question. The friend is myself, but asking for a friend if there are youth or people from underrepresented communities who want to get more involved in politics, in community. Where can they go? What should they do?
So a lot of us have youth councils, Shav, and they're almost like little incubators where I get to mine the wisdom of the young people in my community in Toronto Centre, and they also get to ask great questions and put ideas forward. And we try to meet once a month, and those are happening right across this country. And so I would encourage any young person who wants to get involved via the youth council that their MP might have, MPP might have, their counselor might have, and do it that way. The other thing is just to reach out and get in touch.
Yeah.
We're all on social media. I actually do respond. I drive my team crazy because I
respond to
drive them
everything.
absolutely, and they keep saying you have to stop doing that, because I do. I talk to people on social media and I say, hey, get in touch. Just give me a call. And then remember, I shouldn't be putting my phone number on Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's all of those things. It's all of those things. But I would say, please, reach out if there's a politician that they're looking at and thinking,
Yeah.
hey, how can I do that?
Yeah.
Then go ahead. There are a lot of city councils that have junior representatives as well. We have that in Toronto, where there are young people who are junior members of municipal government, get involved in their school government, student government, so they can understand how things work. But just the idea of seeing people, women of color, doing this job speaks to a lot of kids, and I know that.
Yeah.
There was, I remember during my by-election, so this was 2 years ago, it was October 2020, and I was walking through one of the communities that I serve called Regent Park, and I stopped to talk to some kids. They kind of were in the street, and I had a hoodie on, and I had my jeans on, and my running shoes on, and I explained to them that I was going to be running to represent them as member of parliament. And they said, what? Like, they were in shock. You? And I thought, okay, I kind of look a little naughty. Right? But they said, you, and I said, that's what I'm gonna do. And they said, wow, we'd vote for you if we could. They were young. We'd vote for you. It's important that people can see themselves. We talked about this, because then they can strive to be that. And not just in politics, in every aspect of life.
I have 2 more questions for you. Okay, I'm just making sure. I'm just like, I'm a chatty
Time's flying
Cathy.
by. I don't even know what
I'm a
time
chatty
it is.
Cathy. Steve asked a really good question, but what is a call to action that you would like to leave people who are here watching with? I know there's like so many nuances, whether that's like the corporate space, your community space, the political sphere. But if you were to just simplify it, like what's the call to action you want to leave people with?
There's a couple of calls to action. People often ask, what would you tell your younger self, right? And I always say to be louder. I wished I was louder back then. I didn't rock the boat. I was happy to be there and happy to do a good job and um, happy to be quiet a lot of the time because it was survival. And for any young person that comes to me now, I say to them, age is but a number. Your voice matters. You matter. Speak up. Be a leader. And that young people are not, we always say, oh, you know, they're the leaders of tomorrow. They're the leaders of today. I will tell you right now, my best advisors are my children, and they are 10 and 17. Right? They are wise. My son, who probably saw me looking burnt out, turned to me one time. He was 5 years old, and he said, Mom, you need to play more. And it stopped me cold. Just those little words in his little squeaky voice. Mama, you need to play more, is what he said to me. And I thought that is the smartest thing that anybody said to me in a long while. He was saying you need to stop, and self-care is a thing. So I would say lead. Lead. Leadership doesn't have a number. Lead. And whether that's in your school, in your community, lead. The second thing I would say is serve. Serve. And serve with kindness. Empathy is my favorite word, and we don't practice it enough. And kindness can really change the world. Just imagine kindness. And kids can do that. They know how to do that. And so it is leadership, it is service, and it is doing it with empathy.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that I observe, like service being a lost art almost. Service from an empathetic place. You answered my next question because it was like, what would your younger self tell you now?
No, but I would, and I want to say this too, and I'll
Yeah.
add to that. Siobhan, because I'm of West Indian background. I know you are too. And I would say, as a daughter of immigrants to Canada, the whole idea was my parents wanted to give us a better life. And I'm so grateful for that. But in doing so, that whole mentality of don't rock the boat because we're fortunate to be here is something that is pervasive in our communities. And so the voice, my voice, the voices of others are stifled, even at home, because you want to make sure you keep that job that you got. And you want to make sure that you don't, right? That you don't rub anybody the wrong way. And in doing so, we're teaching our kids not to stand up. And you can stand up in a respectful way. Absolutely. I've done it a long time. You can stand up in a respectful way, but it's important to stand up. And that's where courage is learned. It's where leadership is learned and self-confidence is learned, because there's so many, I'm talking kids in particular, or anyone that's disenfranchised, there's so much that they'll have to encounter already that if they're not standing up for themselves, you know, they can't expect anybody else to do that, that then it really becomes a lost cause. And we don't want that.
So many gems. I'm getting the time check. Minister Ian, thank you so much for joining. I have hundreds of more questions that I hope I can ask you at some point.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch.
But again, appreciate the work that you're doing, the example that you're setting. And I know that, again, I've said this at the beginning, important for youth, but important for me and other women of color who are adults to be able to see someone like you excel and do this work in such a powerful and empathetic way. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your excellent questions
No
and
problem.
a wonderful chat. I appreciate you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to everybody online and everybody here. It was wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Mom. See you tonight.
We could have not asked for more visionary or inspirational leaders to kick off our Empower event. I am so moved and so inspired. What you have done in the time that you've been minister is incredible. The legislation, the funding, the action plan, and truly, it's a beautiful segue into our next session. So without further ado, we will bring forward our speakers. My intimate partner over the last year. COVID-19. Many of whom are women, have shown that all types of violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence in the home, has intensified, exactly as the minister just described. During the pandemic, dozens of women in Canada have died at the hands of male partners or family members, their stories told in news items. Today, we're going to go behind those headlines. In Canada, federal consultations with frontline organizations found a concerning increase of 20 to 30% rate increase in sexual and gender-based violence in some regions of this country when lockdowns were imposed. Home is not always a safe place to be, as we have heard. This is the shadow pandemic growing amidst COVID-19's crisis, and we need national and global collective effort to stop it. And you just heard that we have leaders who are championing that today. As COVID continues to strain our health services, essential services, domestic violence shelters, and helplines, they've reached capacity. And we know more needs to be done and that everyone has a role to play. Today, I am truly honored to welcome the leaders who are going to pull back this curtain and share what is happening on the ground, what needs to be done, and how we can all contribute. And this is truly the panel that love built, as we were chatting earlier this week. I deeply regret my good friend Solange Touchim is unable to join us at this point. So I would like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves, your role and organization, and why you have chosen to undertake this absolutely critical work. Why don't we start with Nika?
Thank you so very much. I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties from our end, but I hope you can all hear me.
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So thank you so much, Sonia, for inviting me onto this panel. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you on this very cold Monday afternoon from my home in Takaronto, which is the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Métis, and many Indigenous communities who've had stewardship over the land of Turtle Island for generations. And as an immigrant into this country, I always walk with gratitude for Indigenous peoples and always try to show up as an accomplice to their calls for, especially the calls for the Native Women's Associations for the recommendations that they have for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. My name, as I said, is Neka McGregor, and I am a Black intersectional anti-caste serial abolitionist feminist. I am also a survivor, which is how I got into this work. And I was prompted as a survivor of attempted femicide. And I remember as I was in the moment when I thought that my life was going to end and my children were witnessing the violence, I remember making deals with goddesses, asking that if I survive this, that I promise I'm going to use every day, every second of my life to bring about change for other survivors, for other women and their children. And that's what I did. In 2008, I incorporated the first nonprofit organization that was by and for women, trans, and gender diverse survivors of all forms of gender-based violence. We now have over 6,000 members globally, and our work is research, community education. We engage in trainings. And for me personally, I sit on a number of committees, including the Canadian Femicide Observatory and the Ontario Domestic Violence Death Review Committee. And I'm just really, really grateful to hang out with people like my darling colleague Lynn, who we do great research on the intersection of intimate partner violence and brain injury. But that's just a very high level. And a big shout out to my team who are all signed in and watching this. Just very, very grateful. Thank you.
We're very grateful to you for joining us, Neka. Thank you so much. Welcome, Angela, coming to us from Vancouver, BC. Thank you for sharing that important crisis line with us. Welcome.
Good morning, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. I am here in the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. It is, which is in the city also known as Vancouver, which is where the organization that I work for, Battered Women Support Services, has been on the front line working to end gender-based violence through delivery of services, through systemic change, through training, and through law reform. It's a pleasure to be here for a number of reasons, because I know, Sonia, we've had some really lovely conversations about our shared vision of a world free of gender-based violence. And I did that territorial acknowledgement to recognize that in order to talk about gender-based violence in Canada, we have to understand the role of colonization and the making of the nation as a nation, and how that's baked in specific kinds of inequities. And those inequities certainly have been my own experience as a biracial Black woman born and raised in Vancouver, and who I am as a survivor of violence. And I witnessed my mother's abuse, and became politicized, if you will, became just so dedicated to ending gender-based violence, to the point of which it's the breath that I breathe. It's the oxygen that gives me life every day. It's what drives me every day. And it was in part due to the birth of my daughter, my beloved daughter, but also the killing of my beloved high school friend. So I'm excited to talk about the action that we take here on the front line, both regionally within Metro Vancouver and throughout the province of British Columbia, but also nationally and internationally. And I'm excited to see how we can continue to engage across these lands and territories in really driving down and getting into the roots, but then uncovering the source of the problem as we build solutions for change. Thanks for the invitation to be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. I have really learned so much from you just in the short time we've gotten to know each other. Thank you for being here. Lynn, coming to us from Waterloo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and in such company. I too am coming from territorial land. I'm coming from the Haldeman Tract, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Neutral Nations. And similar to Neka, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and be on these lands. What brings me to the work is I came by a very sort of an unusual path, I think. I came to social work because of my own injury in a car accident 20 years ago. And I really, like many social workers, wanted to work in my own experience and to support fellow survivors who were experiencing similar challenges and make their lives better. It's something that I also teach in the Faculty of Social Work, and it's something I hear from students a lot. I just want to make things better for the next folks who experience it. And that path brought me to this particular intersection. I am a disability scholar. I'm a brain injury scholar, but I found myself working in the field of gender-based violence because there is a significant health concern within that field that at the moment is being overlooked and underserved. So I think for me, I've landed here with a sense of purpose and a sense of passion. I can't imagine doing anything now. And when I'm done, when I feel like I'm done, then maybe I'll change. But for the moment, there's still so much work to be done and so much relationship to be built and health to be brought forward, that I think for me this is just a comfortable place to be, and I'm pleased to be able to offer what I can to the folks who are living the experiences.
Thank you so much, Lynn. What's fascinating to me is when I came to meet each of these amazing leaders, they have all worked together in different capacities around these shared goals. There really is a very strong community in Canada that is working in support of driving that change, and you are at the very front. As we prepared for our session today, we spoke extensively about the hidden reality of sexual and gender-based violence. We really do want to pull back the curtain with you today and help those who have gathered with us understand the gravity of what's happening on the ground. And you really are all truly working on the ground. We want you to expose some of those hidden or invisible truths. It would be powerful from each of you to share some of those hidden realities with us. If you can hear us, Nneka. Technical difficulty. Maybe we will go to Angela. Angela, I don't know if you can hear us.
I didn't hear the question. If you wouldn't mind sharing again.
Of course. Pulling back the curtain on some of the hidden realities, the invisible truths of what's happening on the ground with each of you. And I know that you each are very passionate about some specific things that you wanted to share today.
Well, I think the biggest thing right now, and it really falls in line with what Minister Ian referenced, is that we've lost a lot of ground over the last 2 years, where we've seen a significant and serious regression and any advancements that we think we've made around gender equity. That the conditions that were mandated in order to help prevent the transmission of COVID-19 then gave rise to more power for abusive partners, as well as all of the economic challenges. And so what we've seen, I'm afraid to say, Sonia, and to everybody watching and listening, is that we've had a regression in both in the equality gains, equity gains, but also an increase in femicide. We've had more killings of women and girls in 2021 than we've seen in the last 3 years. Almost a 30% increase. And from our point of view, and the picture in the background is our outreach team that is based here in Vancouver, which we had to step up in terms of that frontline work, including the crisis line that I'm glad that you were able to share the number for all the listeners and viewers of our crisis line. We also had to step up and be able to provide outreach. And so we've been doing street-based outreach in 4 neighborhoods in Vancouver. So we've really had to expand our services and to respond first and foremost. And so, as sad as it is to face the facts that we've had more killings, we know that the web and the matrix of support of frontline organizations all across the country, in all the territories and cities, are mobilized, and we are connected in ways that we've never been before. We just need to continue to have that support for those services to ensure that they're funded well and that we can be on that front line. mentioned the part around femicide, and that is the killing of women and girls, and I'm on the center for this is the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Accountability and Justice, and that observatory has been really vital in pointing out some of these challenges, and it's been confirmed what we've seen on the front line. So the biggest thing I think is that what we know for every woman that's living in fear, every woman that is killed, and every woman that's living in for the thousands of women that are living in fear all across this nation, we need to be there for them in big and small ways. And that means all of us here, certainly, but also our colleagues and government and every level of policy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I know that you have spoken at length about some of the stories that you've shared with me, and I'm looking forward to having you share those with our audience. I think I'm going to go to Lynn as we work through a technical glitch with Mika's audio. So Lynn, perhaps you can share with us some of the powerful research you're doing, the learnings, and some of those hidden truths that you were sharing with us in preparation for the panel.
Sure. Although, it's sort of, there's so much to know. I'm never sure, which pieces to give at any given time. I think one of the things that's so important from my perspective is that one of the things that really needs to shift on both on a cultural level, a societal level, but as well in terms of government and policy funding, as Angela's talking about, is we need to start looking at this as a healthcare concern. There is a significant number of survivors of intimate partner violence who are experiencing undiagnosed and unsupported traumatic and hypoxic brain injuries as a result of that violence. So many, in fact, that we're looking at approximately 75% of survivors. And if you do the math on that, if we've got 1 in 4 women experiencing intimate partner violence over their lifetime in this country, 1 in 3 and 1 in 4, and you even take a conservative estimate of 50% of those are brain injured, you're looking at 1 in 8 women in this country, which is the same number as breast cancer. So we have as significant a healthcare crisis in intimate partner violence with brain injury survivors as we do in women experiencing breast cancer. And I always bring that one up because I think the really important piece to sort of think about, the number itself is staggering. But the important piece to think about is everything that we know about breast cancer, everything that we do to support it, all the money for research, treatment, access to treatment, lack of stigma, lack of shame around breast cancer, community supports, all of those things that are in place. And none of them, literally none of them, are available for women survivors of intimate partner violence who are experiencing brain injuries. And those brain injuries are significant challenges, can raise significant challenges in almost all aspects of their lives. And I think part of the reason that I always tell people, the first words out of my mouth are always, I am a survivor of brain injury. I am a walking, talking example of what a moderate brain injury can look like. And I think what's important about that is to know how invisible it is. And for many folks, it's invisible. For folks like me, it's invisible to people around me, but at least I understand what's happening. But for many of these women who are survivors of intimate partner violence, we didn't know that this intersection was there. They don't know about it. Frontline doesn't know about it. The medical community is only just beginning to become aware of it. And the research community is massively underfunded and undersupported. We have no Canadian data, or very little. We need those pieces in order to be able to move forward. So for me, I think it's really my big message, I think, in many ways, looking at this as a healthcare concern just as much as anything else.
One of the most powerful statements as we were preparing for this panel, and I really regret Solange isn't here with us to share this, when we talked about, a call for help at a woman that's Caucasian or white like I am versus a Black woman who's calling for help will be asked different questions by whoever is going to her rescue. And you had said that often, there would be questions about, have you been drinking? And often that can be related directly to the brain injuries that you're describing. That is equivalent to being in a car crash when a woman has been abused in that way. Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. One of the things that we hear, on the doorstep, a police officer is in a position to have to make a very quick assessment. And if they see someone standing in front of them whose speech is slurred, who's appears sort of dizzy and unstable on their feet, they may not be able to walk a straight line. They may not be able to recall events in a linear pattern. Their memory may shift in and out. So their story 1 minute may be very different from their story in 10 or 15 minutes. And they may make decisions or choices that a police officer or anyone else for that matter might think, well, that doesn't make sense to me. Somebody somebody rational wouldn't make that decision. They would do something else. All of those things, and often what happens is they attribute that to drugs or alcohol. So they're looking for, it becomes a behavioral thing. It becomes, oh, they're not telling the truth. They're trying to manipulate. They've been drinking. They're stoned. They're high. All those kinds of things come into play. And from that moment forward, the path that's chosen for that woman by folks in a position of power changes. And it becomes a behavioral pathway like that. And what I'm saying is those are all things that I would expect to see in someone who has just suffered a brain injury. So instead of wondering whether or not she's been drinking, wonder whether or not she's just had her head bounced off a wall, because it's going to produce the same response in many cases. And that pathway has to change. We have to move out of that behavioral piece and into a healthcare piece. That woman needs to be assessed by trained, knowledgeable healthcare teams who understand the implications of hits to the head and strangulation, which cuts off air supply. And the implications are a brain injury.
This is such an important reality, and it's something I really wanted to make sure came out in today's session. Thank you so much, Lynn. Neka, welcome. I'm so sorry for any of the audio challenges. We would love to hear from you with respect to some of those hidden realities that you're seeing on the ground leading your organization. Oh, and we're having just a slight challenge, Neka. Having that audio come through.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you so
Okay, good. I just wanted to segue into a couple of points actually that the Minister Marcy had made when she was on in the conversations around prevention, and how the challenges that are faced by certain communities are exacerbated because they belong to these communities. And so our work has been really, really focused on surfacing the experiences of certain communities who have been, deliberately, systemically marginalized because of white supremacy, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism. So the experiences for survivors who identify as Black or racialized or Indigenous are far more complicated and complex than, non-racialized individuals. So for us, the real struggle has been, how do we surface those lived realities? Lynn was talking about traumatic brain injury and the lack of Canadian context data, and the work that we are doing together with the folks at University of Toronto, Angela Colantonio and Lynn and the crew, is on surfacing Indigenous women's experiences of traumatic brain injury, surfacing Black women's experiences, because what's happened in these systems that are based on white supremacy is that there are some people for whom the violence that they experience is somehow deemed more important. So there's this sort of hierarchy of need, hierarchy of importance. Our work in the last 2 years has really been centered on Black women's experiences and making sure that the erasure that has been happening for decades is, addressed. So we talk about intersectionality, and Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, not to get academic about this, but intersectionality being understanding that there are some people, because of their different identities, who the way they experience systems is different because of the multiple identities. So you include Black women living with disabilities, trans individuals, Indigenous people. For me, it is really important, and again, just echoing Minister Marcy's points around seeing people that look like me, right? And knowing that there are supports for people that look like me, and these supports are being delivered by people that look like me. And these individuals that look like me understand what the multiple traumas that I've experienced and how the systems have been set up in ways to discriminate and prejudice and harm. And in the last 2 years, right, with the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, Black women's experiences, Black girls' experiences, Black gender diverse people's experiences have still been undermined, underplayed, not talked about at all. And very grateful to Minister Marcy's Department of Women and Gender Equality, because they funded us last year with a substantial grant to advance gender equity for Black women, Black girls, and Black gender diverse individuals, which is a pan-Canadian initiative that we're going to be working on. And in that work, we will be surfacing the experiences of survivors of gender-based violence, our experiences navigating the healthcare, our experiences, challenges with the criminal legal system, challenges with the family law courts, child welfare across the spectrum. And the same work needs to be happening with Indigenous communities. And actually, quick shout out to the Native Women's Associations. We've got a meeting tomorrow with Lynn and her team, because it's important that our experiences are are held at the center, just like we as survivors are held at the center. Because you cannot, and again, this is a point that Siobhan and the minister were making, you can't develop and deliver policies for people without consulting people. You can't develop and deliver services for survivors without having survivors at the center and at the forefront leading it. So our work has been centered and in leadership. And I love the point again around leading with love and compassion and kindness, because when you think about the word misogyny, misogynoir, one of the things that we did was to figure out a way to reframe that, right? The hatred of women, hatred of Black women, reframe it by actually naming an alternative framework, which was something that we developed called Amorginy and Amorginoir, which is about centering love for Black women, Black girls, and Black gender diverse individuals. And I think it's that leading with love and kindness and compassion that's actually going to shift the world. I firmly, firmly believe that. That's the type of policies, that's the type of programs and trainings that we as an organization have been focused on over the past 2 years.
We are so grateful for it. Please, please come to Ottawa so that you can share all of those incredible learnings, all of you with us here on the ground. I believe one of the most powerful ways to reach people's hearts and minds is through storytelling. You have each shared with me very gripping, very real stories of what you are experiencing in a very human context where we can relate as people. I wonder if you could each share a story that would help all of us to better understand the impact on the people that you are working with and fighting for every single day. Angela, I'd love to start with you.
Great, thank you. Yes, and it was really wonderful to work with Paulette Senior and myself, as well as NECA, to prepare the proposal that is the wage funding proposal that NECA references in terms of that national work to advance gender equity for Black women and girls and gender diverse peoples. And we've been doing another piece of that is around the color of violence. And we've had the really a wonderful opportunity to build a beautiful framework that is looking at and centering the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and women of color and their experiences of violence to really move away from this idea of a universal woman. And Sonia, when we were speaking on the phone, and I was telling you a story of a Francophone African woman who was here in Vancouver dealing with violence and was being surveilled deeply by her partner through technology. As we know, when COVID hit, we all went online. And he really stepped up, as a lot of abusive partners do, the control and isolation that was about controlling her through the technology. So having access to her cell phone information, her iPad, her social media accounts, as well as he had a tracker on her car, and was limiting her access to outside. Every time that she'd have to go out, she'd need to take pictures to verify where, and text back to him to verify where she was. That kind of control through technology is something that we've seen escalate, certainly over the last 2 years, and it's another piece of the puzzle and the support. And the woman that I spoke about had dealt with deep serious physical violence. And Lynn, talked about head injuries, and and this particular woman, she had been beaten unconscious more than once, and had and it was her child who said to her one day, Mom, Daddy really hurt you. And that was a catalyst for her and to try and find a way out. Her father actually connected her to us because where he was in the world, he had seen the media that we had done and that national coverage that we had really sought to help amplify the issues around COVID and the impact that the isolation was going to bring for survivors, for victims. And so when she called us, we worked just in this way that can only be about understanding what it means to escape. We talk about survivors leaving and why doesn't she leave? We have see them supporting women to escape. And it's a completely different thing, and especially when you're being surveilled in the way that she was being surveilled. So the long and kind of challenging and very complicated process that we worked with and supporting with her through leaving, through escaping, resulted in her eventually being in a transition house. She was so terrified to step out that door because she knew that he would kill her. And not only that, she knew that the police would not be a resource for her, and that she was adamant about not calling the police because she could not trust the police in all of the ways, and also thinking that given that the ways in which police do have really been ineffective in providing part of a safety mechanism for Black survivors, for survivors of color. And that's another piece of research that we're doing here at BWSS, is looking at the ways in which policing interface with violence for those that are Black, Indigenous, or of color. And so she knew that, and she said, we cannot call the police. And so helping her escape was a very delicate and kind of nail biting moment. And we had a car waiting for her, and she and her daughter did escape. And we were able to support her to get to a local transition house, and then supported her to return to where her family was. And that was a harrowing moment. One of the hundreds of harrowing moments that we've seen over the last 2 years in supporting survivors to escape during this particular moment in COVID-19, with the kinds of isolation and the kinds of surveillance that abusive partners are now exercising as a result of technology, and really leveraging the ways in which an abusive partner can use technology to maintain coercive power and control. And so I am happy to say that she's free of abuse, and she's healing. Her and her daughter are healing. And I said it before, and I'll say it again: for every woman that escapes, for us at Battered Women Support Services, there are thousands more that are living in fear. And that's why we stay on the front line. We stay on the front line every day to provide that first response. We consider ourselves a kind of first responder in a sense, and to that first response that is about the safety planning and planning to escape, and all of the other aspects that come into it, including health and supporting survivors to access the healthcare system, and being an advocate for survivors within the healthcare system. In fact, within all of the systems, because as has already been noted, the system is it's a kind of a blunt tool, if you will. And it doesn't interface very well with community, and doesn't necessarily understand what the issues are for women, which is also why we do training. We've been delivering training to residents through the University of British Columbia Med School. So those family doctors, just before they take their final exam, they're getting training about how to respond. So there's a whole host of ways in which we work within the frontline response, within the law, and then systemically. And it's going to take all of that, and quite frankly, to scale that up considerably in order to make the kind of impact that we're going to need to ensure that survivors have an effective response, and to work toward ending gender-based violence, which I actually live for. I work toward that end. We want to work ourselves out of existence.
Thank you. I am so grateful that you shared that story because I do think it helps all of us to truly understand the gravity of what's happening and what is occurring on the front lines. NECA, I know that you're also very much on the front lines. Do you have a story that you'd like to share with us?
You know, when I saw this question, I didn't know which one to pick because there are so many. I'm going to focus on sort of the good news stories, because one of the things that came out for us as an organization during the pandemic was we were able to create our peer-based counseling support services. And again, that was funded by the Canadian Women's Foundation and with from Minister Marcian's Department Wage. And this peer-based counseling support services is free to survivors, where we were able to develop sort of a 12-week program that is, as I said, peer-led by other survivors, because survivors understand each other and each other's experiences. But it's not the traditional social workery, Lynn, type of counseling supports. It's really helping survivors on the healing continuum and having shared moments of shared joy, moments of shared celebration. We talk about courage being that space where you're afraid and doing it anyway. Celebrating how women have been courageous to get up and go, right, and take care of themselves and their children. So for us, the past 2 years, as well as being fraught with the violence and the killings and the trauma, there have been instances of joy and celebration. And it's those instances of joy and celebration that keeps other survivors, right? It gives other survivors hope and makes me get up in the morning, right? Because I can see the value of my work. I can see the value of my team. I can see the value of our members. And when I think about why survivors join the organization, and I think Lynn alluded to this earlier on, it's because you want to use your lived experience as a way to create change. And what better way than to help another survivor who is in that space where you've been. We've had our peer counselors, our C6 peer counselors, in their own self-reflection and debriefs talk about how they went in to help other survivors, but have come out so much stronger themselves as a result of that giving. And so for me, constant gratitude, constant gratitude for survivors who are stepping up to do this work. I feel so blessed and so fortunate to be doing the work, because as I said at the beginning, having survived an attempted femicide, you wonder what comes next. What can you do as a result of this? And what we're doing and what other survivors are doing as part of the work of eradicating gender-based violence is that we are on the front lines, right? We are at the center of the issues, hence the name. And tomorrow I'm going to be making a submission before the House of Commons on gender-based intimate partner violence. And my focus is on how do we change the system? Because I don't believe in, and I say this all the time, the current system that exists, whether it's criminal, family, child welfare, all of these systems, and again, repeating what the minister said, were created not by us, not for us, but to prop up a particular population, a particular part of the population. So I don't believe in tinkering with the current system. And our work as survivors on this front line is to find new ways to disrupt the current system, disrupting and reconstructing. And for us, that disrupting and reconstructing comes in another part of the work that we've been doing around transformative justice, transformative accountability and justice, which is based on community accountability, and is also based on showing this sort of wraparound love and compassion, not just for the people, those of us who have been harmed by the violence, but those who have done the harm, right? Because we understand that sometimes people who harm have themselves been harmed. So how do we help them change their behavior, change their attitude, change their conduct? Because I don't believe that the criminal legal system, that the police are safe spaces for a lot of us. I wouldn't have called the police when I was going through in fact, I never did, when I was going through my experience in my own personal life. So I don't believe that the criminal legal system, the police, is the site that actually brings about change. So part of the work that we do, again, en masse, is figuring out new ways to bring about the types of world, the types of societies that we want to live. So we engage in social justice advocacy, social justice activism, training, research, and I'm just constantly grateful because I get to hang out with people who I absolutely love, who are equally as passionate and brilliant. Thank you.
We are so grateful that you're sharing your brilliance with us today and the dedication that you have. Lynn, I would love to hear a story from you, and then we'll conclude with actions. What can we do as individuals, as communities, and organizations? Lynn, over to you.
I think, the first thing that comes to my mind, and it's like Neka said, I spent time thinking about it. And I feel very honored as a researcher to be gifted with women's truths and with their experiences. I think is an incredible gift. And I thought, well, which one do I privilege? Which one do I choose? And I can't. I can't choose whose voice to bring forward singularly. So I thought I'd bring forward a few voices collectively. And tying into what Angela was saying, about the ways in which COVID has had an impact. We did a study, and the timing was just right, and we were able to gather some of the first Canadian conversations around what is happening on the ground. We were speaking with folks within, I think, about three months of the first shutdown. So very, very early on, and had a lot of really interesting information. We were being told exactly what Angela is talking about, the use of effectively government sanctioned surveillance because of the things that had to take place for the communities to and individuals to be safe in a very unknown and unprecedented medical crisis. So those kinds of mechanisms for control became far more available to an abusive partner. Options that had been in place for women to offset some of those were no longer in place. So women being able to go out to their jobs for 8 hours a day and have some respite. Women being able to have family members come in, childcare options suddenly disappeared. In-house visits from family and friends where there would be community that would help women and support them disappeared overnight. Access to the medical community. Who was going into an ER room? I mean, if you remember back, the ER, we were all sort of worried about flooding the ERs, and exactly the opposite happened. The staff was sort of waiting for someone to come in the door. And all of those things had a dramatic impact on women's lives who were not safe at home. And I think the minister's comment, that really hit home through our research as well. Staying safe at home is great if home is a safe place. But if it doesn't start out that way, then this experience just magnified that, amplified it, and provided mechanisms for control and abuse that honestly I couldn't have cooked up if I'd thought about it. All of a sudden we had stories about partners withholding hand sanitizer or threatening to go out and get COVID and bring it home, or all kinds of things along those lines that just really were whole new ways to engage in that kind of behavior. And I think we had there's this sort of talk about the shadow pandemic and COVID being an abuser's dream. And I think that really stood out to me. That was a participant said that, and that really came home for us, and with something that we sort of brought forward on a more general sense. And I think that the piece that I come back to is that COVID made something clear that was already a massive problem, and it amplified it and it magnified it, but it didn't create it. And I think that's important because I don't want us to lose sight of where we are moving forward in this time. There is an awful lot of awareness coming forward right now. There are folks who are moving this agenda forward through government, through policy, through frontline. So, I don't want to I don't want to see that stop because we think, oh, well, it was all COVID related. These were things that were already in place. And the sort of the systems that don't recognize the complexities and the intersections that Nneka's talking about, those need to change. We need the legal systems to understand what it means for a survivor who has a brain injury, who is cognitively impacted in such a way that memory recall is not going to be linear. If you tell your story to a police officer or a judge in a courtroom or in a police circumstance, and your story is all over the place and it's shifting and it's changing, that goes to your credibility. The thing that is immediately going to be questioned is, are you telling the truth at all? Why are you making this up? Who are you trying to harm? All those kinds of things. And that needs to stop. We need to have those systems understand what it means to have a brain injury and how those injuries might manifest themselves. The other piece that sort of really stands out to me, and I think it's one of the messages that I try to get across to just about anybody who'll listen, this whole piece about why don't women leave? And I love the term that Angela is using with escape. I think that's really important. That shift is really important, having us look at this from a different perspective. But my answer to that is, you try doing anything when you can't hold a thought in your brain for more than 5 minutes, when everything shifts underneath you every time you look at it. My experience of a traumatic brain injury 20 years ago, I nearly didn't make it out, and I had every single advantage there was to have. I'm white, I'm educated, I come from a Canadian national background in the sense that I'm not already othered by my heritage. I had money, I had resources, I had family support that most people don't have access to, and it nearly broke me. How do you expect someone to cope with that, with those kinds of challenges? When I leave home, I take a sticky note with a list of all the things I have to do, and I put them in numerical order. So I have to do that once before I leave, because if I don't do that, chances are I'm going to sit in the middle of town and wonder, how did I get here and what am I doing? For me to have those kinds of challenges and to struggle with them, how can we possibly expect women who are dodging punches and not seeing anger on another person's face, because that's part of brain injury too? How do we expect those women to be able to plan and execute a safety strategy and to be able to escape? We've had women talk about hiding notes in their cars because they can't remember what it is they're supposed to do and where they put things, so they hide notes to themselves in their cars. It's things like that I think are, those are the stories that I can share, are their voices telling us what they've experienced. And as a researcher, I try to compile that in such a way to bring that to life and to allow that to be shared with others. So
there's so much information that you have all shared with me, and we are going to make it all available to all participants. We're going to promote it very broadly here at Invest Ottawa. We're a little wee bit over time. I would love to hear just one thing from each of you. What takeaway, what action do you want to leave with this audience before we transition into our mental health panel led by the Royal Ottawa, which is a great segue? Why don't we start with Nneka? Maybe we'll start with Angela. We'll come right back to you, Nneka.
I love the idea of support your local anti-violence organization, and in particular your local transition house. Wherever you are in Canada right now, know where your local transition house is and support that frontline service. Transition house movement has been a vital resource all across the land and needs your support. And I think that is one of the best ways to be able to get that first response, to be there. And then the other piece is your local sexual assault center and women's center that's on the front line. Wherever those services are, support them through your financial donations for sure, and also through gifts of clothing, as well as volunteer. And but get to know who they are. It is the community-based response that we know that is the most effective in making lasting change. Community-based organizations are on the front line. They're providing prevention and working with youth and children in schools. They are providing crisis intervention. In many cases, they're providing housing and those supports, and as well as working for systemic and social change. So I think that that really frontline response is where our investment should be right now, in part because we know that frontline services that have been established for years and years are the least funded, the most precarious in the sense of not having those long-term resources, and are doing the most impactful work for survivors ongoing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try NECA again to see if we can get one takeaway.
Yes, I'm back. My one takeaway is to encourage people to speak to the people in their families, people in their lives, is for you to look around. You know somebody. I guarantee you know somebody who's experiencing this right now, and to lead with love and kindness and compassion, and don't shame, don't blame, just be there as support. And that is as important to me, because we know that a lot of people don't, and as incredible a job as frontline services do, there are so many other women, people who don't access them and go to families and friends and their communities. So my one ask is for the families, friends, communities, colleagues to show love and compassion and ask, how can I help, to a survivor that they know.
Thank
Thanks.
you. So powerful. And lastly, and not least, Lynn, the last minute is for you.
I'm going to take it and do two things with it because I'm greedy. My first thing, my ask is we need research. We need the numbers. We need the deliverables to be able to support the arguments for the funding for the front line. So my ask is for research money, and great, fund me, but fund others. There are a number of us doing this kind of research across the country. We are all leading the way on this. So help us to do what needs to be done in order to help the front line and help them to support survivors everywhere. And my second piece is just a tiny little piece to say, I know you're running out of time, but you had wanted us to talk about resources, and we have a super one available for folks. Our acquired brain injury research lab at the University of Toronto partnered with Women at the Centre a number of years ago, as well as a couple of other community organizations across the country. And we developed a toolkit for frontline workers. It's called the Abused and Brain Injured Toolkit. It's at www.abitoolkit.ca, and it's free of charge. It offers, it's open access. It offers all kinds of information, both on a personal level as well as survivor stories. It's got research available to you there, and just basic information on what is traumatic brain injury and how does it happen within survivors of intimate partner violence, and what do you need to know in order to be able to identify that and support for it.
We are going to share all of these resources broadly at the conclusion of today's panel. Thank you so much, NECA, Angela, and Lynn, for being with us, and to Solange. We are just so grateful. And with that, we would like to thank you, and we are going to segue directly into our next panel. So I am going to call my good friend Jenna up to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much.
All right. That was a fabulous panel. What a great, great discussion. I have the great pleasure now of introducing a great friend and incredible leader in our city. I'm honored to introduce Jamie Patton. Jamie is the Executive Director, President and Executive Director of the Canada North Business Association. And of course, it doesn't stop there. Many of you know Jamie as a force within our city and our technology sector. She's certainly never been shy to add her voice, and also when it comes to women's issues. So I'm really excited to invite her up today. We have, please join us, Jamie. And actually, I think you're going to take it from here, which is fabulous. So I'll turn it over to you, Jamie, to introduce the upcoming panel.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm so happy to be here with you, as well as to be here with so many of the men and women in this room and online. There's a lot to learn from our guests today, and the feedback, even just from these first two panels, have already inspired me to my core to respond to today's discussions with service. We can all take what we've heard and make sure the conversation doesn't stop here. That's how we drive change. I was reflecting on today's topic, and a memory of some of my earliest days with the Canada North Business Association came to mind. This time, 4 years ago, we were gathered here on stage collaborating on a discussion around mental health and the impacts of entrepreneurship. And little did we know at that time just how much mental health would come into the forefront over the years to come. So first, I'd like to recognize Sonia and the Invest Ottawa team for their continued leadership on this topic and for taking monumental steps forward in expanding the scope of the discussion as well. It's really remarkable. This next discussion couldn't be more timely. As a new mom myself of 2 boys, an entrepreneur, and a leader of a passionate, dedicated team of all women, I can personally identify with the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on mental health. But I think what's resonated with me most is the influence and importance of communities such as this one at Invest Ottawa and Bayview Yards and those across the city of Ottawa to support, empower, and lift up one another through the good times and the challenging times. So it's my great honor to introduce our next panel discussion, Mission Critical, Women and Mental Health During and Beyond the Pandemic. This panel explores the detrimental and disproportionate impact of the pandemic on mental health of women, particularly those of marginalized communities. This includes key needs and challenges, opportunities to drive change, and available resources and support. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel, Dr. Joanne Bezubutz, President and CEO of the Royal Ottawa Hospital. With more than 20 years of experience in healthcare and leadership, Joanne is a proactive and innovative healthcare leader known for driving change. She understands the power of collaboration and is highly effective at developing sustainable, meaningful partnerships with key community leaders. And it's really an honor to have you here today. Thank you, Joanne. And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Wonderful to be here. This is my first time at this venue, and I'm very, very impressed. And I'm also very, very impressed with the program today, this afternoon. Just amazing. I want to thank Sonia for being such a strong advocate for women, and in particular, women's mental health, a topic that we're going to be talking about this afternoon with a wonderful team of panelists who are going to be joining us from across the country, actually, not dissimilar to what we just saw in the previous session. So today, we're going to talk specifically about how we can create a safer and healthier space, more inclusive for women. And we do know that the pandemic has had a tremendous impact on all of society and in women in particular. And we heard some of the stories in the previous session regarding intimate violence. And it's no surprise that women's mental health and substance use has also been very, very impacted. We're putting together our panelists right now, and I will be turning it over to them very, very shortly. But before we do that, I just want to provide a little bit of information from our research institute, the Institute for Mental Health Research at the Royal, where we have now estimated that 1 in 2 Canadians have experienced signs of depression, anxiety, and increased use of substances since the pandemic. And we know from the care that we have adapted very recently as a result of the pandemic that we have increased the number of individuals who are reaching out for help who did not have previous engagement with mental health or substance use services. So these are folks whose situation has now been amplified because of the pandemic, and they are coming for help. So that's really something to pay attention to. And in particular, young girls and the impact the pandemic has had on them. We did, speaking of adaptation and how we've modified services, we are one of the organizations in our region that did adapt and increase the amount of virtual care that we provide. And boy, was there ever a lot of uptake. We created a prompt care clinic as a result of the pandemic, and we are seeing more than 60% of women. The average age is about 40 years old, and they come from all walks of life. And if we know anything about the research in recent years regarding mental health and substance use, is that it is a condition that will never discriminate, no matter what walk of life, no matter what gender, no matter what your talent is, what your skill is. We are all susceptible, and if not ourselves, our family members, our neighbors, our children, our parents. I will now ask our wonderful panelists who I see on the screen to introduce themselves and to tell us, to kick things off, why women's mental health is important to you. And we will start west to east because we usually do it the other way. We're just going to be a little different today. And so I'd like to begin with Victoria Lee from Fraser Health Authority and welcome you. And if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why women's mental health is important to you.
Thanks so much for the kind invitation to join the panel on this important topic. My name is Victoria Lee. I'm the CEO President for Fraser Health Authority, which serves 1 in 20 Canadians, the largest and fastest growing health authority in British Columbia. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm conducting business on the traditional, unceded, and shared territories of Coast Salish people, and specifically Quetzalcoatl, Tuas, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I think in terms of your question around mental health, Fraser Health actually is quite a diverse region with 20 municipalities and 32 First Nations, as well as 90% of refugees and 40% of newcomers actually settled in our region. And of that, I've actually chosen to come to Fraser because I can practice global health at a local setting. There are 40,000 people that are medical staff in Fraser Health that I refer to as Fraser Health family. And over 80% of those people are women. And as you know, the pandemic's had a significant impact on all of us, but has had a disproportionate impact on frontline healthcare workers. And given that over 80% are women, mental health and the impacts of the pandemic on women have been an important topic and critical topic for workforce health and also staff wellness overall, and keeping that resiliency in our workforce, because at the end of the day, only cared people can care for others as well. So I think this is a very important topic. Looking forward to going into more depth about today.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Next, I would like to invite Lynn Grew to introduce yourself, your organization, why women's mental health is important to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Lynn Grew, and I am the CEO of the Native Women's Association of Canada. I'm here today on unceded Algonquin territory. I'd like to acknowledge that. I'm a Métis woman, and I have been with NWAC for 5 years now. And I am here because I have a daughter, and I do not want to see my daughter sitting in this chair dealing with the same issues when she's my age. I want to see some generational changes. Our communities have been devastated by colonization and what we now know is a genocide. So I want to do my part so that the next generation will not be in this same situation. So thank you for having me here today for this very important conversation.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Next, Suzanne. Please tell us a little bit about your role, your organization, and why women's mental health is important to you.
Well, thank you very much, Joanne. First, I'll start off with sharing that I'm joining all of you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. My name is Suzanne Obiora, and I'm the Director for Gender and Race Equity, Inclusion, Indigenous Relations, and Social Development here with the City of Ottawa. And throughout my life, I've watched strong women achieve incredible feats as they raise families, provide for self and others, pursue careers, advance in education, sometimes simultaneously, and balance the many challenges life brings. I've been raised by, or my circle has primarily been Black women, Black and immigrant women, and I've observed the emotional toll and the mental health strain of trying to keep everything together, and the struggles many women, particularly Indigenous, Black, and racialized women, have endured living with mental health challenges, often in silence. And that silence can be related to um, limited access to services, stigma within their community, shame, fear, and poor interactions with healthcare providers, and really looking for ways to stop the silent struggle and stop the stigma around mental health challenges and normalize the conversation and ensure culturally responsive mental health supports are available to the diversity of communities that we have here in Ottawa.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And Wang Li Wang, nice to see you again.
Hello, John. Good to see you again. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jianli Wang. I'm a health scientist at the Royal Institute of Mental Health Research, and I'm also a professor of the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology at Dalhousie University. I hold a Tier 1 Canada research chair on big data, health data science and innovation. So I'm an epidemiologist, so I do research about the distribution and the determinants of mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, suicidal behavior, workplace mental health. I also build risk prediction tools for early identification of mental health problems to inform the early prevention and population mental health planning. Well, women's mental health is important in psychiatric epidemiology because you can literally observe sex difference in any mental health problems. For example, women are about 2 times more likely to have depression, anxiety, but they are less likely to have substance use related disorders, and they are also more likely to report suicide ideation and attempt. So, women's mental health has been a very important research topic for me. So, in my research.
Wonderful. I see that we've lost one of our panelists, and hopefully Suzanne will be able to join us very shortly. But how lucky are we to have this cross-section of professionals joining us today? It's just amazing. We're going to have a fantastic dialogue. And I'd like to kick off this afternoon's discussion by asking you more specifically about the challenges that you are seeing and hearing about on the ground for women to access the care and support that they need given the pandemic. And this is in relation to mental health and or substance use or concurrent disorders. And again, we'll work our way from the west to the east. Victoria, please.
Thanks for that question. I think I'll give a couple of examples, starting with our women from the 40,000 people in the Fraser Health family that I mentioned. When I look at the impacts of the pandemic and mental health and substance use issues, I think we are really seeing the tsunami of mental health and substance use impacts from the pandemic in our workforce. You're hearing a lot about healthcare burnout and staff burnout, and also some of the concerns around the great resignation of people that are actually unable to or unwilling to continue to work in health because of tremendous burden that healthcare work has had over time during the pandemic. It's been tremendous amount of, I think, demonstration of how healthcare is a calling and more than just work, because people have day in, day out put themselves up to the challenge of providing care. But again, 80% are women. And I think when I look at that, women across the board, the impacts have also been disproportionate. Women in nursing, clinical, or medical as physicians have had different supports available versus people that are working as housekeepers or in food processing settings, for instance. And one of the things that we really noticed was the disproportionate impact on mental health and physical health for women that are working in different settings. So fortunately in health, even though the impacts have been significant, a lot of resources have been available. Whereas when we're connecting with, for instance, a workforce that's largely migrant workers, like food processing, where we have majority of those industries in our region, they didn't have any of the supports that are available for employee kind of supports, workplace health supports that are available, and living in situations with multi-generational homes or in settings where even if they were sick with COVID, they did not feel comfortable or safe declaring that they have COVID symptoms. They felt that they didn't have economic or even healthcare choices to be able to say that they've got COVID. And then afterwards, not only the physical impacts, but then the mental health impacts and burden of carrying, if they are not coming to work sick with COVID, then they don't have any livelihood that they can support the rest of the family. So being in that continuous vicious cycle of carrying not only the financial burden, but the, I think, emotional, mental burden of actually supporting families in very, very, I think, high risk settings were also really, really impactful. And what we saw and noticed during that time was that not only the disproportionate impact on disadvantaged and vulnerable women, but beyond the physical illness, the mental health impacts and burden of carrying that as a person. We saw a lot of women carrying that as a sole individual burden and not having the networks that were available, especially in those vulnerable settings. And that was a critical area that we stepped in to support those women in terms of social works, non-governmental organizations that are able to provide supports available, and of course clinical services available through our health authority as well. But I think a couple of things that I really wanted to highlight in terms of that front line on the ground trends. One, it's that it's very much real, and the burnout, not only physical but mental health being even greater. And secondly, that it's been disproportionate within our sector, such as healthcare, but outside of our healthcare sector, across industries, those that are vulnerable have been even more disproportionately impacted through the pandemic with the mental health and substance use impacts, as well as I think the supports. I think when we've seen the greatest benefits come together, it's when our partners in the community all rise up together.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And thank you for mentioning the bellwether that we've had as organizations to even witness the impact the pandemic has had on our human resources, whether that be health human resources or other workforces, because we've really become dependent on other social constructs to allow women and families to function effectively. And when that changed with the pandemic, given schools closing and virtual learning and all of those differences and adaptations that were very positive so that we could keep things going, there were byproducts as a result of that. And I think that's going to be for a long time coming as well. I wonder, Lynn, if you could also share with us what you are seeing in the front lines and what kind of impact that has had.
Thank you. Actually, we have been able to record over 4,500 phone calls that came in to our elders. We've been able to record over 10,000 comments from participants during our workshops. And then we did a number of surveys and from our in-person comments. So we actually have quite a bit of data. We did that purposefully because the impact of the COVID and the pandemic was so significant on our communities. We needed to document it very carefully, and we did. So some of the things that came up for us was that not being able to see people in person, that isolation, of course, was a tremendous challenge because a lot of the healing, psychological, emotional, spiritual, cultural, is done by our elders on the land in a cultural setting, and that came in to disrupt all of that. And so it created a tremendous barrier, I'm going to say. The pressure was on, tremendous pressure on the elders, because the numbers I'm giving you is just the tip of the iceberg. We were only able to take that many calls, but how many would have we been able to take had we had the resources to do that? So a big challenge was, the elders are between 65 and 90, and here they were doing frontline work that is tremendous. During this COVID period and pandemic, we also had a significant, event which triggered the entire collective Indigenous community, which was the finding of the remains of the children from residential schools. So you had just layers upon layers of, and they were intergenerational impacts as well. So it's very complex. Some of the community members were having repressed memories, that just came out flooding, and then insufficient resources to be able to deal with all that. Some technology limitations were definitely there. And so the elders struggled to take traditional in-person, I'm going to put, therapies in quotations, to do ceremonies, spiritual ceremonies. How do you adapt those on technology, using technology? So that was a very difficult process there. And then there was some barriers in terms of language. So when we did have some of our workshops and such, we could do them in English and French, but there could be participants from different areas of the country speaking different Indigenous languages. So there was a lot there. Those challenges were well documented by us. I guess that what was brought out to us even more was the importance of the cultural healing and the spiritual path in healing, not to be minimized at all for Indigenous people, as opposed to mainstream services. and the importance of the role of the elders in that healing process.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And it's not lost on me that you received that many phone calls, and yet there would have been an even greater number of women reaching out for care, including Indigenous women, Black racialized women, who would be accessing services, mainstream services, and then perhaps being subjected to biases or assumptions based on their race, the fact that they were Indigenous, and so forth. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. And I'd like to hear from Dr. Wang now as well, if you could just share with us what you've seen through your lens.
Sure. I'm going to share my thoughts from the research perspective. We know that since the implementation of lockdown, there have been a huge number of studies, research, and try to understand the impact of COVID. From a research perspective, one of the best way to understand the impact is to follow a cohort of people, the same group of people, over time, and you measure them, use the same instruments, and you compare them, before and during the COVID. And from that way, you can minimize the biases related to recall, reporting, and also the representativeness of their the population they represent. So by working with my colleagues at the University of Sherbrooke, we've been examining the data from like 330,000 Canadians who participated in we call it Canadian Partnership for Tomorrow project, or also called CAMPATH, who, these projects follow a cohort of participants recruited from 8 provinces in Canada, and to measure the depression, anxiety using the validated instruments. Then we define depression, anxiety using, if you only pass the certain thresholds. And by comparing the prevalence of depression and anxiety before in 2019 and 2020, we found that there has been a greater increase in anxiety in comparison depression. So there's also increase in depression as well in terms of the prevalence, but anxiety increased a lot more than depression. And women and women compared to men, women had a greater increase in the prevalences. But the problem with this project is, with the data is, they only included the people between the ages of 30 and 74. So we have no information about the people who are in the younger age group. Okay. The increase in the mental health issues or the negative impact of the COVID also reflected in the mental health services use. Because now I'm situated in Nova Scotia. The Maritime Sport Support Unit look at the data, the physician billing data in the past 2 years, and they found that there's a significant increase in the billing for anxiety disorders. Comparison, you compare the 2020 versus 2019. And this increase is only in anxiety disorder, but not in the depressive disorder. And the women had a higher increase than men, so which is consistent with what we understand, from the media and from the other information sources. So this is about the Canadian context, and the results from the UK. They examine the trends from the different perspective. So, for example, one longitudinal study conducted by University of London, they followed over 70,000 adults in the UK, and what they observed is in the first week of the lockdown, the implementation of lockdown, there's elevated level of depression and anxiety. But with the time goes by, the depression and anxiety level declined for both depression and anxiety. for lasting about 20 weeks. And after 20 weeks, and it's kind of like going back to the pre-pandemic level for depression, anxiety. But another a large UK study, which is called a UK household longitudinal study, they followed about 20,000 people from the in the community, which include I think 60% of the participants were women. And what they observed is a large, like a majority of the participants, they were doing well. They have a low depression and anxiety score, but there is a proportion of participants in their study, it's about 11% of those who had a high depression anxiety score initially, but the score or the status has persisted throughout the follow-up period, or it's getting worse. And for those people, but women and women and Asian, and also people with a pre-existing mental illness were more likely to be in that group. So that's all we have about the research data from the big study, longitudinal study in the UK and in Canada. That's all we know for now. We still have a limited knowledge about the long-term impact of the COVID on people's health and the social and economic impact.
Thank you very much. And I'm just on that same theme, and this time I'll start with you, Lynn, if you don't mind. You know what happens when that expression that you didn't know how tired you were until you stopped and took a breath. And so I'm just wondering for all three of our panelists, if in anticipation of what we've just heard Dr. Wang express around some of the improvements that they've seen in other jurisdictions, what do we anticipate for where you are and what you're seeing on the ground? And what is it that you're going to be doing going forward to adapt to what may be an increase of awareness on a population's part, namely women, to reach out for help? What are you going to do differently?
It's a bit of a difficult question because, the impacts of colonization are so great, and the difficulties in the communities on the ground with the a collective retriggering of the community is so significant. And I've been with the organization 5 years, so our phone has never, like the triggering, the massive triggering is very significant. It's not to be minimized. I don't see improvements coming out very easily. I think what's really important is the residential schools cause so much harm to Indigenous people, intergenerational, that the government found a way to build all those schools and institutionalize an entire population. They're going to have to find a way to undo that kind of damage, and that's going to take generations. So it's long term. It's going to have to come out for. Nobody can heal anybody else. People have to heal themselves. The community has to heal itself and has to find a way to heal itself. The programming has to come from the community. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's not completely without hope, but it's not that easy either. It's really not going to be easy. What are we doing about it? Well, for example, our organization has decided that we couldn't wait any longer. We can't wait till the government wakes up or till somebody wakes up and says there's entire generations that are going to be lost here if something's not done. So we've decided to build our own model, our own healing model. We started the first one in Chelsea, Quebec. So it's a healing lodge, a resiliency lodge created by Indigenous women for Indigenous women, led by our elders. There's been a lot of interest in our model. I know we've had the universities from British Columbia reach out to us to say, can we collect data on what's happening, in this space, which is on the land, number one. Number one healing factor is that reconnection to the land, the reconnection to community, the reconnection to culture, to language, and to spirituality. These are the keys. And I say that not from myself, it's coming from the elders, from the community that have brought this forward, that this is the healing path for our communities. So this is what we're doing, and we're hoping to have the support for an initiative that needs to be across the country. There is a model in the Americas right now. It was actually started in Mexico, called Casa de la Mujer Indígena, House of Indigenous Women. They have over 35 in Mexico. They started them many years ago because they realized that the mainstream services were not working for Indigenous women. They said, we need to specialize this service, and they did it. So we do have hope that something can come out, but it's urgent, and it's very significant and quite difficult, but has to be done.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I'm also getting a signal that we're going to be running out of time in about 5 minutes, but I do want to give our other two panelists a moment just to tell us what they're going to be doing differently going forward in anticipation of a continued or ramp up of requests for services by women as things, go back to how I don't know that they'll ever go back to how they were, but the new reality of how they're going to be going forward. And Dr. Lee, I'd like to start with you this time.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I'll tie in a couple of things that I heard that I think are really important from, layering that Lynn had mentioned in BC, for instance. It's been the pandemic and the waves and waves and waves of the pandemic, but also the triggering events of the burial sites that have been found, coupled with the racism in our health system. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond had found, as well as on top of that, we've had the 1 in 1,000 heat dome event, wildfires, as well as the 1 in a 500-year flooding event. So I think both from healthcare provider side of things, where it's been more than a marathon, it's been an ultra marathon, and Tough Mudder and all of those almost combined. So to Dr. Wang's research and some of the impacts, I think it's going to take a long time for us to actually truly recover and heal from this, and requiring quite a significant amount of resources. And internally within the health authority, we've been doing quite a bit of reassessment, as well as resources that are available for not only self-care, but also team care, because we're finding that team aspect of care is significant for mental health and engagement. So there's a lot of tools that are available. I know that we're short on time, so I won't go into that, but also working with our Indigenous partners, Métis, First Nations communities, and supporting each other in mental health supports. We've got a lot of liaisons that we've expanded our services to ensure that those services are available more externally to people that are suffering, but being provided in a culturally safe way. And then for our support for mental health, similar to what you mentioned, Joanne, I think a lot of the virtual supports have been quite pivotal during this time, but expanding that to 24/7 so that it's coordinated, integrated care that's available, and not every kind of door leading to emergency department, where we know that's not the right space for mental health substance use supports. And I think there's a role for women to actually support men in some of these areas, because we know that men are less likely to engage in care when they need. And I think there's a pivotal central role, women in our community, women in families, etc., that we need to also support women to engage in more broadly proactive care as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning 24/7, truly a client and family centered system that you're describing there. And I think, most provinces now are looking to how they can become much more client and family centered. And we will close off with you, Dr. Wang. If you have any recommendations for those of us who are providing care on what we might consider to do differently going forward based on your research findings.
Well, it's complicated. I would say there's no one size fits all solution. So it's all depend on who you are and what you work, your occupation. So for example, Dr. Lee just mentioned about virtual care. So we know that since the lockdown, there we have implemented all, like I say, many of our mental health services were delivered through the virtual care. It's great. It has many advantages, but it's also maybe challenging for certain group of people, like say people like elderly people who not that savvy about technology, and people living in the rural area. So, and also some mental health condition may not be appropriately treated through virtual care. So we need to understand, do more research to understand what the virtual care is good for whom and for what kind of a mental health condition. So we need to do more research in that front. And the second one I would recommend is there's a good opportunity for raise awareness and the promotion of the notion of prevention in women, because the women, from our research in the past, we know that Canadian women has a better mental health literacy than men. They are more likely to embrace the notion of prevention, do something, being more proactive, and do something to help themselves and to stop depression and anxiety in the first place, so they don't have to go to the hospital, and so our healthcare system could be more sustainable. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. So my takeaway today, and I hope you'll appreciate this, Lynn, if I refer to elders teaching as Indigenous technology, is high tech and high touch, and secondarily, prevention. And let's take care of our girls as well. I want to thank all my panelists for joining us today for this very, very important conversation around women and mental health. And I want to thank Invest Ottawa and specifically Sonia Shorey for creating this venue for this conversation. Jamie, for your advocacy and support of mental health in our community, and to our audience. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for a riveting panel, so much actionable insight. And I know that there were questions and requests for resources. You can trust that we will be sharing those directly following today's event. Thank you so much, Joanne, for being such an incredible leader. I have the privilege of serving on the board at IMHR at the Royal, and it is truly an incredible group of people. You do amazing work. Thank you so much. We are now going to move into our final fireside chat of the day, and it is truly going to be powerful. We've actually extended the time by 20 minutes from the original time that we had proposed, because it is going to be so important for all of us to hear. We collaborate closely here at Invest Ottawa and Bayview Yards with the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, our premier sponsor. They're a trusted collaborator on so many shared goals, and that includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're also our presenting partner for today's important event. We're delighted to have Justin Sherman, Regional Vice President, Business Financial Services at RBC, to introduce our incredible keynote speakers for our final chat. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Sonia. My first time here. I'm new to Ottawa, moved here in the summer, and what an impressive building, what impressive people, and what an impressive day so far. As I mentioned, I'm new to Ottawa, and it's great to be at Bayview Yards. It was a little nerve-wracking to put the suit on, and it took me an extraordinary amount of time to pick a tie. I probably let you down, but I did do it on the first try, which was great. RBC is proud to sponsor Invest Ottawa's International Women's Week program. At RBC, being inclusive is at our core of who we are. It's in our DNA. It's good for our people, it's good for our clients, and it's good for business. We've been recognized as the second most diverse and inclusive publicly traded company in the world by Refinitiv. We've also been named Bloomberg's Gender Equity Index. RBC also received a Catalyst Award for increasing representation for women in leadership and promoting equal access to career opportunities. We've committed to attracting and retaining talented women and supporting their advancement through career opportunities. We're proud of the progress we're made, but there's still much work to do. As an ally and as an out gay senior leader at RBC, I know how important it is to feel included, to feel supported, and to feel that I can be my authentic self at work. As a global corporate leader, it's our responsibility to use our voice to inspire greater inclusivity in our workplace and in our communities. The event today so far is a perfect example of that. Some tough topics have been discussed, but it's where we need to take action. It is a true honor for me to introduce Katie Duchek, our senior leader, Executive Vice President for Regional Banking. I should know this right off the top of my part. She has a huge role and is responsible for all of our advisors across Canada in our branches and our advice centers. Katie leads with empathy and care, and I know this personally in every interaction, and she encourages us as leaders to do the same. She makes it her mission to give voice to others, to put us on the spot and to share our stories with others and to make sure that we have a sense of belonging and inclusion. Katie will share her personal journey with us and what it means to create a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable world for all of us. Her story is truly inspiring. And to help support that conversation today, another amazing, inspiring woman, a local business owner, small business columnist, advisor to newcomer entrepreneurs, Carla Briones. Over to you both.
Is this on? Yes, it is. Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm great, Carla. How are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited to talk to you and get started with this awesome conversation. And before we get into this, the thick of the story of your personal experience in coming out, I want you to take us and tell us, who was Katie as a child?
Oh my goodness. That question wasn't on our notes.
It's part of the second question.
Well, it's funny. I don't have the questions even open. So you get to drive the bus regardless. So it is an honor to be here. Thank you to Invest Ottawa and the team for inviting both you and I to be part of this conversation. I believe we'll get into labels and what it means to be a woman with gender affirming experience in a bit. I do deeply believe in this concept, not a concept, this truth that we're whole human beings. And in order to understand the whole human being, you gotta get to know the layers of what's made up that individual. So I am the child of newcomers to Canada. My parents immigrated to Canada after the Second World War from Germany. My mother was a child refugee during the Second World War. My father was a Russian POW, and they both lost parents during the war and, experienced their own traumas. And if you've done any research on intergenerational trauma, you would understand that they brought their childhood traumas to Canada. They were determined farmers and determined entrepreneurs that were trying to build a better life. But the trauma of their own childhood is certainly something that I grew up with. So I think in practical reality, I grew up with verbal abuse. I don't really like using those words because I think my parents were incredible human beings. The best they knew how. But I did grow up with a lot of anxiety in my home, given my parents' traumas and their parents' traumas. I also, as a child, grew up with learning challenges, as people have heard me say before. I'm sure if you assessed me today, I would come out as dyslexic. I struggled in public school and parts of high school to do okay in school. And I also had this little secret as a child, and I remember back as early as probably 5 years old, where I would, because my mother would also, and my father would be away in a factory, my mother would be out on the farm, and I would have control of the house. So I would spend time tearing the house apart and going through my mother and father's drawers, I had zero interest in what was in my father's drawers, and I had all kinds of interest in what was in my mother's drawers, her pretty clothing, her shoes, and I knew every millimeter of her jewelry box. Not that there was anything expensive in it, but I knew every millimeter of her jewelry box because I tried on those old German clip-on earrings and you name it. And so my gender questions or my gender feelings, I guess, dated back to as early as 4 and 5 years old. And, you know, I remember at like 10 or 12 years old, putting on my older sister's bra and underwear and stuffing them full of Kleenex and putting the boy clothes back on and running out to the sandbox to go play in the sandbox. The probably the last thing I would say about kind of childhood or teenagehood is I became, through all of that, I became pretty defiant and pretty determined. Determined to build a better life than my parents had, almost to prove them wrong. Determined to prove the teachers wrong that I felt judged by, and kind of determined to build the perfect life and prove that I was good enough and worthy enough. And that determination is what served me in finding a life partner and having 4 children and incredible children, and pursuing, you know, a career and moving all around Canada in my career and even internationally into the Caribbean with my career, is because I was not going to let anybody stand in the way or let me not prove myself to myself and to the world. So that's kind of the early life experience, if that answers your question.
It does beautifully. Thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your childhood with us. So let's fast forward to 2019. This is the year that you came out to your CEO, and then 80,000 RBC employees. Take us through that journey. What happened, and what were some of maybe the unexpected outcomes of this particular day for you?
Yeah, well, I think in order to do it justice, I have to tell you that the pre and then the post. On the pre side, I actually didn't know. Well, firstly, I don't describe myself as transgender. Not that I have a big problem with the word transgender. You know, because definitions help us find ourselves. Role models help us find ourselves. What I have a problem with is the 2 words transgender. I didn't transition my gender, I affirmed my gender. So I have a bit of a problem with the 2 words. And from an identity standpoint, I'm a woman. I'm Katie. I'm a woman. I'm a parent. I have 4 amazing kids. And I just happen to have this thing called gender affirming experience. I didn't transition my gender. I affirmed my gender. And then the other thing, back to my childhood story and what's technically called intersectionality, is there's lots of layers to who Katie is. Gender is one of them, and my gender affirming experience is one of them. I actually didn't know what transgender was until about 5 years ago. And that might strike you as odd. I'm fairly well informed and fairly well read, but I was so determined to prove myself to the world. And I had such blinders on around beliefs. I never researched what transgender was. I certainly did a lot of research on the internet about feminine feelings or female feelings or desires. And every time I researched something disgusting would pop up and I'd feel even worse about myself. And these feelings that I had carried around for 50 years. So it's not like I didn't research it, but I never really understood what transgender was And candidly, I was confused between gender and gender identity and sexual orientation. So here's the lead up. There was about a 12-month period where I dropped my oldest daughter off at university and we're bringing her bags to her dorm room, and there was a poster of an individual assigned male at birth, so they looked like a boy, and they were wearing a silk blouse and pearls. And it stopped me. It was on the wall of the dorm, and the poster's title was Embraced Gender Variance. And it stopped me dead in my tracks, and I thought quietly to myself, I said, oh my God, could the world become so open that I could be me? And then like 4 months later, I'm getting my hair cut, and there's a National Geographic called, Gender Revolution on it. And it was stories of kids from around the world or people from around the world that were embracing their gender. And it described the difference between gender and sexual orientation, but I still didn't understand it. But there were signals. And it went on. Then my mother passed away, and my sisters, out of the blue, gave me her jewelry box. And I thought, what the heck is this about? But I cried profusely because I knew every single thing in that jewelry box, and I had no clue why they offered it to me. But it struck me. It struck an emotional chord with me. And then finally, on August 25th, 2017, I booked lunch with a dear colleague of Justin and mine, Lawrence Spicer. And I said, Lawrence, what the heck is transgender? And I said, who the heck is Caitlyn Jenner? And then he explained to me how Caitlyn poured herself into her sport and poured herself into her life and was suppressing deep female gender feelings that she had carried her entire life. And I go, wow, that sounds familiar. And then I said, yeah, but how can you come out as Caitlyn, or how could she come out as Caitlyn and still like girls? And Lawrence looks at me and he goes, well, Caitlyn's a woman, had female gender her entire life, but was born in the wrong body. But Caitlyn is a woman and she happens to like women, which makes her a lesbian. And at that moment, you could have pushed me over with a feather. That was August 25th, 2017, probably about 12:30 noon. But my whole life, and this is the hard part, my whole life changed. Once I had words to describe, and I can assure you, I went home that night, and for the next week, reading Caitlyn's stories, and I finally found other people's stories, and I go, oh my goodness, this sounds like me. The first person I told a week and a half after that lunch was my spouse, my partner. And then I went on a 12-month journey to try to prove or disprove it. And I can tell you, after every week, you'd want to prove it even more, because when something is so innately part of you, of course you want it to be true. But I equally became more and more convinced that the world was going to reject me, because there still are countless horror stories of transgender people being murdered, especially transgender Black women in the US being murdered. There's countless stories of people losing their jobs, countless stories of families falling apart. So I was convinced of the worst. And as the months went on, I was more and more convinced that it was true, that my gender, that I truly was wired female on the inside.
Katie, to interrupt you there for a second, what tipped you over the edge? What is there a specific moment where you truly, that something flipped, where you truly affirmed yourself and you said, this is who I am? Was there a moment?
Yeah, there was a couple. Well, I'll be brief, a three-part kind of answer to that. One is, from the moment of that lunch, Like I remember thinking, if I was the woman I truly was, what would I eat? And I started watching what, women that, I've watched what women eat, and I watch how careful they are about what they eat. And I changed my diet overnight, and within 9 months, I lost 30 pounds. Like, I started buying skinny jeans and did things to kind of feel more like I was expressing parts of myself. And that started day one. I couldn't not. My curiosity had been there for 50 years. Now I was like starting to explore it. So that was the first. The second was after about 9 months of therapy with psychologists and gender therapists, a couple of which were horrific experiences. Not every psychologist is the best psychologist to handle a transgender individual, especially if they're trained in conversion therapy. I'll tell you. So I had a couple of horrific experiences on the gender therapy and on the psychologist front, but I finally found the hardest ass gender therapist in the country. And I said, once and for all, I need you to get to the bottom of this. He interviewed me for 2 months, put me through testing. And in April of 2018, he said, Katie, you are diagnosed as severe on the gender dysphoria scale. So you have a severe case of gender dysphoria. And as you would know, because of your family background, that's bad. Like I was in severe distress over not being able to express my gender. And then at the same time, he says, and you are at the 97th percentile of anxiety. So not only is my mental health in bad shape, but my gender is driving me crazy. She wants out of the bottle really bad. And by September, and the third part, by August, September of 2018, which is basically a year after I finally pieced it together, I felt severely homesick because that's the best way to describe the feeling of not being able to express your true self. I was feeling severely homesick day in and day out. Or I was feeling like a caged animal, like just wanting to get out of the cage. It was driving me literally bonkers. And my fear of rejection from the world was so bad that I was ready to end my life. And that would have been August, September of 2018. I was at the end of my rope. And so what tipped it was I gently confided in a dear friend of mine, Leanne, who is a psychiatric nurse, or was a psychiatric nurse. She's retired. And she said, Katie, your plan is flawed. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, even though you're probably thinking you can make an accident happen and end your wonderful life, your children will figure out that it wasn't an accident, and you will create multi-generational trauma for your children and their children's children and their children's children if you do what you're thinking you're going to do. And it was at that point I literally penned a letter of intention to myself and says, this is who I am. I'm Canadian. I work for RBC. I have a great support network of key friends that will be open and help me through this process. I want to live for another 50 years to be with my children, and I will face my truth. So that was the ultimate tipping point.
How long did it take you to write that letter to yourself?
Oh, not long. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. And I have it on my phone today still. And because I've written it in my head 100 times over the previous year, it wasn't that hard to write because I knew what I knew, but I hadn't accepted it or embraced it fully until that moment in time. And then, as you know, from that September date, a lot of things happened really fast. In December, I told my children. In February, I started hormone therapy. In February, I came out to the CEO of RBC, and then my boss, Neil McLaughlin, and the head of HR. In March of 2019, after telling the CEO, I went and saw myself in the mirror for the first time ever. I'd never seen who Katie is in real life. I only dreamt of who I was. And I went and saw myself. I booked a trip to New York to spend some time with a woman that helps people like me. And I saw myself in the mirror for the very first time, and I knew it. I knew that if I experienced that, and I saw in the mirror who I thought I really was, there would be no getting me back. Or getting the old me back. You got me back.
I'm curious to know this because, as you know, my son is trans as well, and he suffers from dysphoria. And there was a pivotal question that I asked him when he tried on his first binder, and I asked him, "What did you feel when you saw yourself for the first time with a binder in a body that is meant to look like your head has told you all this time?" And his answer was, "I felt seen." So I'm curious to know, how did you feel when you saw yourself for the first time in that mirror as Katie?
Euphoric would be kind of an understatement. And what's kind of cute about the experience is the woman that helped me, her name's Monica. She picked me out a blouse, and she, I go, "Oh, that's not going to look very good on me." She goes, trust me, you're going to look hot." And then she worked on my makeup for like an hour and a half and teaching me makeup. I saw no mirror during this whole process. And then she put on earrings, and then, she put on a necklace. And then, I had to wear a wig at that time, and she put on the wig. And then she said, "Katie, stand up, close your eyes, turn and look in the mirror." And it was like, oh my goodness. And I said, the first thing out of my mouth was, "Oh my goodness, I look like my oldest daughter. I see her in me." That was the first thing that I said. And then the second thing I said was, "Oh my God, I love me."
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I have never said that about myself in my entire life. And I genuinely felt self-love in a way that I had never felt before. And as you've only got to know me a little bit, but I am so at peace with who I am, and I so much love being myself and being able to express myself today in my life. But that was the first thing that came to mind for me.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so uplifting to hear. So tell us then, what happened, or walk us through the day that you told the company. And what was the journey like?
For employers listening, like after coming out to the CEO and the head of HR and my boss, they were extraordinary. And like any human being and leader, they certainly were scared. Here's a woman that leads 20,000 people that's going to transition, something neither of the three of them have ever experienced before. Is Katie going to mess it up? Is Katie going to be able to sustain her performance in the job? Like, you can imagine all the questions that were on their mind. They were certainly on my mind, but they were incredible. A woman in HR delayed her retirement by 6 months to help build the coming out plan within the company. The CEO and my boss offered to join me in a coming out video to 80,000 people, where I told I decided I would be completely vulnerable about my life experience and my life journey and my children, and show them a picture of the real Katie for the first time. So they offered to do the video, and then they told the board of directors, they told senior management, they told my senior leadership team, which includes 11 senior vice presidents, all to help them prepare to be leaders in the company. And then on June 17th, 2019, the video went out to 80,000 people. And the reason I can be so confident today is the total opposite happened from what I expected. We're now getting to the root of your original question, like, what happened? And I had people warn me. The chair of the board, Katie Taylor, had lunch with me a week before the video went out. And she goes, be prepared to be overwhelmed. And I go, I'm doing this to save my life. I'm doing this to be me. She goes, just be prepared. And that's exactly what happened. I received hundreds and thousands of emails, everything from you're courage and you're brave, which I still, even to this day, after talking about this so many times, I still struggle with the term bravery or courage. I did it to save my life, to be around for my children. People said, you're going to save other people's lives. I'm going, what do you mean I'm going to save other people's lives? I'm doing this to save my life. And, I now understand what that means, to be a visible leader, probably the most senior business leader in the world. I don't know of another person other than rock stars and actors or actresses that have come out, but I don't know of another business leader that's come out and kept their job leading 20 or 25,000 people. So I now understand the obligation I have to help other people, and I accept that obligation because I am privileged. But the most mind-blowing part of coming out, because I showed vulnerability, droves of women, men, people we would describe as visible minorities in Canada, Indigenous people, they all opened up to me about their own personal struggles. I'll never forget a fellow woman walking into my office and telling me, she goes, Katie, because you showed your vulnerability, I feel more human than I did before. And I go, well, what do you mean? She goes, I am married to a wonderful man. I have a wonderful life. We have a beautiful home. We're going to have an amazing retirement. But she goes, there's not a day that goes by that I do not that I do not think about and remember being physically abused by my first husband. And she goes, and I feel the hurt and the pain of that under the surface every day. And because you shared with me your vulnerability, I feel more human and less alone than I did yesterday. And I thought, oh my God, like I had no idea. So the mind-blowing part for me is all these emails that I got. And the fact of the matter is I've had, like other women, I've experienced sexism, I've experienced misogynistic behavior. I didn't like it before when I tried to fit in the locker room. I like it even less now. I've experienced some negative things. I've had a little bit of dead naming, and you will know what dead naming is, where people use your old name or your old pronouns. That person never really existed. This is the real me. That person was a bit of a fabrication to be what I thought the world wanted to be. So using that name, that old name, can trigger a lot of anxiety and trauma for people because it means your true self isn't being accepted, even though the person might have done it by accident. So I experienced a bit of that, but the real mind-blowing part is I've experienced like unbelievable amounts of love and kindness and support. And I sit here today, believing and knowing that I have an obligation. I have an obligation to help other women find their voice and be confident and be feminine and be the amazing woman you are, not something else that you think the world expects you to be. And I believe deeply in inclusiveness. Diversity is easy. It's a fact. Diversity is both visible and invisible. The hard part is creating a kinder, more inclusive world where the whole human being feels seen, heard, and respected for their uniqueness. not isolated for their difference.
So then why do you think that it's important to talk about the full spectrum of the human uniqueness rather than just simply diversity?
Yeah, thanks. So one is, and I've got an expanded, the Katie definition of diversity, which is we are made up of invisible and visible dimensions of human uniqueness, and multiple dimensions of human uniqueness for many of us. That's why you asked me the question about my childhood, newcomer child, anxiety in the home, verbal abuse, learning disability, gender, etc., LGBT. There's many layers to who you are and to who I am is one part of it. But the other is when you look across, whether I'm talking to a white man on my team who lost a sibling at childhood, or I'm talking to a white woman on my team who had to pack the car to get mom out of the house because dad was abusive, those are invisible things. Nobody knows about those stories unless that person chooses to tell them. Or I'm talking to somebody, and it's actually quite, we've talked about it openly at work. I have a colleague on my team whose mother took her life when he was 24. And he carries around this extraordinary need to not leave anybody behind and to make sure his employees are hugely successful because he carries the burden of watching his mother's mental health as a child. And, you can be sure that he feels an obligation to help other people given what he experienced with his mother. Well, those are invisible. Being a woman is visible. Being, Black or coming from India is visible. In some cases, being Indigenous is visible. And being in a wheelchair is visible. But the common thread across these invisible experiences or these visible dimensions of human uniqueness is we all carry the same thing. We carry around this fear that if somebody knew our whole story, that they'd reject us or judge us for being less than, for not being good enough. And that's why inclusivity is so important. Is I can assure you of the people that I've worked with that have invisible or visible dimensions of human uniqueness that I've been trusted to know, that the person that is the rock star employee is the rock star employee or community leader because of those experiences. It's that uniqueness is what made them resilient. It's what made them powerful. It's what made them determined. It's what made them empathic to other human beings. I have a dear colleague, Annette, who's Indigenous, who's Métis by background. She was put into foster home because her mother, who's a residential school survivor, could not care for her because of her traumas. And Annette put herself homeless through high school. And Annette is an executive with RBC today and is incredibly resilient, incredibly talented, and is one of the kindest people I know. Justin, who introduced us both, who has come out openly as gay, is one of the kindest, most hardworking, collaborative people I know. And so, isn't it wild that the people that have experienced the hardest journeys in life, visible or invisible, are often the most resilient, the most determined, and often the most empathic, kind, loving people. And why? Because they wouldn't want another human being to go through what they went through. And they've promised themselves that they're going to live a life of kindness rather than a life of hate and rather than a life of judgment. And so, that's how I think of diversity, but it's also ultimately why I think inclusivity is the answer. Inclusivity is the how. It's overcoming biases, systemic biases, unconscious biases, overcoming beliefs. Being LGBT is not a lifestyle, I can assure you. It is innate. It's in our wiring. It is just part of who we are as human beings. It's proven by science. It's not a lifestyle. It's who we are. It's just a diverse dimension of our uniqueness. But I can tell you, coming out on the other side, you would never want another human being. You wouldn't want your son to experience anything but an open, inclusive world that allows him to be seen, to be heard, and respected as a whole human being, so that he can bring all of his creative energy to the world that we live in today.
Oh, I love those words. Thank you for saying that. So for those people in position of leadership who are still grappling at that idea of being 100%, inclusive, and who are still not there, what is at stake for them? What is at stake for their businesses? What do you think? What do you think is at stake for them, for their brands, so on and so forth? If they're still not there yet.
I think you have to go back in time on a few things. One is we talk about it in Indigenous history and how colonization resulted in genocide. In a genocide, it was said earlier in the event today. What's also important to go back in time and acknowledge is that colonization, the rule of law, in some cases religion, business, government, was heavily dominated by men. And there's no going back and changing it, but it's important to understand the history. And a lot of that came about because of physicality. Physical dominance mattered. Strength mattered. It was a physical world. The Industrial Revolution was a physical manifestation of that. But that's what happened. So the rule of law, business, governments, etc., colonization was heavily influenced by men and brought with it gender bias and beliefs that, you needed to behave a certain way and act a certain way to fit into the world. So that's the history part of it. The reality is we live in a world today where I'm not paid to move items down an assembly line, with physical strength and agility. I'm actually paid to bring my mind to work, my emotional spirit to work as a healthcare worker or as an advisor to other human beings or, as an artist. I'm being paid to bring my creative energy and my emotional being to the world, not just my intellectual being to the world. And any human being that is holding back because of fear of rejection or judgment, picture a Black person growing up in the world, being told and taught their second or third class from the time they were a child, and how to behave around police officers and how to, avoid conflict and avoid judgment as a Black person. That person is trained from a very early age to hold back, to suppress, to guard themselves from the world. Well, anybody that's hiding something from the world is therefore not expressing their full creative self, their intellectual self, their emotional self, or their creative self to the world. And so if you think about not being able to express yourself in the workplace fully, the workplace by default is probably missing out between 10 and 20 or 30 or 40% of your creative or intellectual power, or your motivation, or your spirit, or your soul. And I don't know a workplace that can achieve its goals in today's world without tapping into the full intellectual or creative or emotional potential of a person. That's the basic part. But if you think about in a workplace, at a societal level, think about these individuals who are more apt to be marginalized at a societal level, who therefore are more apt to be in the lower class, the lower earning parts of society, and less apt to have access to education, healthcare, job opportunities, well, while the world evolves. Well, those individuals for sure are not reaching their full human potential because they don't even have access to education or meaningful opportunities. So whether we talk about this within a workplace, as a CEO, you're missing out on human potential by marginalizing somebody or by not creating an inclusive environment where they can bring their whole self to work, or where you might be having a culture that is still fairly male dominated or gender biased. And it's not done, I don't believe it's done for bad reasons. It's on much of the bias is so embedded, it's either unconscious or it's just an embedded trait. But if you don't create an inclusive environment for men, for women, for all genders, let alone all cultures and all backgrounds, introvert, extrovert, bottom line is you're missing out on a lot of potential. And at a societal level, I think it's big. And at a global level, and it's unfortunate with the Ukraine war happening, I don't think we're going to solve the problems of the world, whether it's environmental problems or social and economic problems, without building a much more inclusive world, a much kinder, more caring world that is both socially and economically inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my long answer to what's at stake.
So, Katie, tell me, since coming out, did your leadership style change? Did anything change within you as a leader? Is there anything different?
Well, what hasn't changed is I'm as intellectually curious as I ever was. I actually cry less than I used to. I cried less, ironically, because I'm more at peace. I'm just more at peace with who I am. It's not that I'm a hard ass chick. It's just I'm more at peace with who I am. But the point is, back to gender bias. Women are often categorized as either our elbows are too pointy, like you might think mine are today, or you might think women are too soft and they're not strategic, or they lack business acumen. Well, that's ridiculous. Gender studies recently have proven that we're finally getting over that hurdle, that women can be as strategic, as business savvy as any man can be. So we're getting over those hurdles. So I haven't lost any strategic ability or intellectual ability or any curiosity or any business experience, but I would be more empathic. I would be kinder. I would be more caring. I'm much more at peace with who I am. I'm much more confident sharing my opinionated nature than I used to be. But I'm just totally at peace with myself. And because of what I've learned about other human beings' experiences, I'm much more comfortable and much more aware and much more empathic as a leader than I would have been before. And I think, I would hope that the people on my team would say the same thing.
Thank you. And I have one last question before we wrap it up. And it's a selfish question. And that question is, what's your hope for the generations to come, the generations such as my son, those generations you're actually paving the roads for? What is your hope for them?
I want your son to be our prime minister is what I want.
I love it.
Or I want your son to be RBC's CEO. Like, I want your son to be his true self is what I want. And I want what you want for your son. I just want your son to be so at peace with who he is and believing and knowing that he can be whatever he wants to be. And your son is learning already to be resilient and to be kind and loving, and how to refuel his energy banks when they get drained because of his journey. What I would also say, though, is I have a lot of hope because of your son and because of my children. My children are a bit older than yours. When I came out to my children, my youngest daughter spoke up first. We're all sitting on the bed. My spouse at the time was with me. We did it together, and the four of us are sitting on the bed. And my youngest daughter spoke up first. Her name's Nicole, and she goes, her first reaction to hearing, "What pronouns would you like to use?" It wasn't, "Are you going to quit your job?" It wasn't, "Are you going to get fired?" It wasn't selfish at all. She said, "What pronouns would you like to use?" My oldest daughter spoke second, Danielle, and she said, "You better come out to RBC before you retire because you're going to rock the world," which made me cry because I didn't come out to rock any world. I came out to save myself, as I said to you earlier. And then my one son, Justin, who goes to Ottawa U, came out and said, "Will you still want to snowmobile with me?" And all he cared about was togetherness. And my fourth son, Simon, said nothing. And we actually asked him, because he actually should have put it together, because there were many signals that I was sending to the family that he had more exposure to than anybody else. And his reaction was, "So what?"
Okay.
So yes, my children went through a dip over about 12 to 18 months while they watched me go through my change. But their initial reaction was who cares? Just be yourself. So between role models like your son, between the reactions of my kids, I think the generation coming after, the leaders of the future, this concept of human uniqueness, or more importantly, this concept of difference is gone. They get appalled when you point out aspects of race or color. They get appalled by it. They go, "That's not good." To them, this is a no-brainer. So what I want is people like your son or your daughters or any young person to grow up in a world where they get to hold on to this open-mindedness, this acceptance that they've been raised with, and where they get to be their whole self, which candidly is what we need to save the planet socially and environmentally. And so that's what I want. And the other thing is, if you're not with this as a CEO or as a business leader or a parent, you need to be, because these are the people you're going to hire. These are your children. And you can relate better than anybody as a mom. Of course, you go through an initial shock when your child tells you about their gender or they're gay or something. But the sooner you get over that hurdle and you can be just this totally accepting, loving mom of a child, forget gender or sexual orientation or whatever, the sooner you can get over your hurdle, the less psychological damage you're going to create on your child, and the more love and infrastructure you'll provide to that child as they embark on their journey. And I think we're building a better world, and I know you are. I know you are as a mom of Nicola, who I can't wait to meet.
He can't either. One last question. I lied. There was a question that came in from the audience, and the question reads, how can people be a supporter of the transgender community?
Read about it. There's actually some really basic training available online. If you just went off this call and Googled dead naming, you would get the 10-point checklist on why using the person's dead name or what you thought their gender was, pronouns, how it will matter to the mental health of that person. And will make the world of difference in embracing them as a whole human being. Like, you can Google this stuff. It's not that hard. You can Google scientific research on transgender and find out that there's research that's been done that essentially proves out, it's constantly debated, but essentially proves out that the brain can be wired female or male, and the body can be wired the opposite, because the brain develops in a different trimester than the physical body develops. And so you can have this incongruence between how the mind is wired and how the body is wired. And so it's pretty easy to do research. And lastly, I would say just regardless of what we might have been taught in 50 years ago in the world, whether it's about women, whether it's about the Black community, the Asian community, the Indian community, the Indigenous community, the LGBT community, regardless of what you were told 50 years ago, don't listen to it. Assume that the biases that you were raised with are wrong. Assume that every human being is born equal and is owed the respect and the opportunity as a whole human being. Like, that's the starting point. That's what we should all assume. And it's not even assume, it's what we should all know and accept. The fact that we were raised thinking that Indigenous people were less able is disgusting. The fact that we were told that somebody from the Black community or the gay community or a woman is less able is disgusting. It's not true. Everybody has extraordinary power and potential to make a difference in this world, intellectually, creatively, and emotionally. If given the gift of psychological safety, the gift of being heard, seen, and respected, if given the opportunity for education, love, and support, that's what we should remember. So anyway, I'll jump off my soapbox. Thank you so much for being a role model yourself, both as an entrepreneur, as a newcomer, as a very special mom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much for gifting us with your story. And we need more leaders like you, more leaders that can show the world that doesn't matter. You just need to be a good person. And you definitely, from the little that I know you, are an amazing human being. So thank you so much for joining us.
Could we have chosen more inspirational leaders to conclude our Empower event today? I am so grateful. I had the privilege of meeting Katie at an award ceremony. She won a very prestigious award, Women of Inspiration, last fall, and you were so generous with your time when I reached out. Thank you so much for being with us today. You truly are a role model. And my dear friend Carla, who is an inspiration to us every day here at Invest Ottawa, a member of our subcommittee. I am so grateful for your friendship and your support. Thank you. And now we are going to invite our President and CEO, Michael Tremblay, to the stage to deliver closing remarks as we wrap up our very powerful day today.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Empower, just the perfect way to describe this afternoon's event. I want to first start by thanking Sonia and Jenna, who co-hosted until she had to go back to Parliament, for really taking care of us this afternoon. So thank you so much for that. I'd also, absolutely, thank you. Just amazing leadership. I also want to thank, you can't do events like this without partners. And so I want to thank the Royal Bank. I also want to thank Inkblot Therapy for the investment and the time and the energy that goes into producing such an event like this afternoon. I have to really deeply thank this afternoon's incredible presenters, our panelists. I hope you'll all agree that was something very special. That was incredible. For us as a company to be able to deliver programming, we really do lean on thought leadership from those around us. This afternoon was a very special event. To be able to do our best work, we need to make sure that we include everyone. And to be able to even have an ability to include everyone. It starts with having that enlightenment that you understand the importance of that. So I'm very proud of our company. I'm proud of the team that put this afternoon on. I'm mainly proud because we're smart enough to know at this point that we've committed to the journey. We've committed to the effort it's going to take to make the difference over time. And over 3.5 years in particular, where we focused and we've really doubled down on this, taken ourselves out of the picture and put our community at the center of everything we do, we are having a real impact because of that partnership we have with all of you. So thank you so much for today. Thank you for dialing in with us virtually or being here physically. It's great to see Bayview back. Have a great evening. Thanks so much. Thank you.